My sister booked my dream venue for her own wedding exactly 3 days before mine. She laughed through the phone, telling me I could just find somewhere else to host the 200 guests I had already invited. I did not argue with her. I let her keep the reservation. On the morning of her stolen wedding, the property manager called her to explain that the owner of the building had canceled her booking personally. She had no idea the person signing that eviction notice was me. My name is Emma Johnson. I am 33 years old, and for my entire life, I believed that earning my family favor meant making myself invisible. Before I reveal how a stolen wedding forced me to stop shrinking, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to Mia Tells Stories if you have ever had to set a hard boundary with relatives who demanded your silence to keep their peace. It is Saturday at 9 in the morning. The Seattle rain has finally cleared, leaving the sharp snow-covered peak of Mount Rainier visible against a pale gray sky. I stand on a private stone terrace, wrapped in the heavy ivory silk of my wedding gown. The air is crisp, biting through the sheer lace sleeves, but my hands do not shake as I hold the phone to my ear. Yes, I say, keeping my voice quiet and even. Cancel it. All of it. Right now. I press the end call button and lower the phone. For one long beat, I close my eyes. There is no smirk on my face. There is no thrilling rush of victory pulsing in my veins. There is only a deep, hollow ache in my chest, the familiar weight of mourning people who are still alive. Sending that order cost me something profound. It meant accepting that the family I wanted did not exist. On the cedar side table next to me rests a framed architectural rendering of a sweeping glass conservatory. I trace my thumb over the polished glass of the frame, lingering a second too long over the illustration of the grand entrance. The venue was supposed to be mine today. It was the centerpiece of a celebration I had spent 14 months planning. My phone vibrates against the wood, breaking the quiet morning air. A new text message lights up the lock screen. It is from my 29-year-old sister, Harper. The message reads, "Best day of my life," followed by a champagne glass and a diamond ring icon. My jaw tightens. The dull ache in my chest recedes, replaced by a sharp, practiced discipline. They wanted me in the shadows. They expected me to fold, to sacrifice my own joy, and to disappear just as I had done since childhood. But the woman standing on this terrace is done shrinking. I take a slow breath, compose my face, and turn away from the mountain. I step back inside toward a room full of bright laughter and genuine friends. 72 hours earlier, the illusion of my family was still intact. 72 hours before that morning on the terrace, my biggest concern was a slight alteration to the bodice of my wedding gown. It was a typical Tuesday afternoon in Seattle. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of an exclusive bridal boutique near Pioneer Square, blurring the gray cityscape into a watercolor painting of slick pavement and rushing commuters. The seamstress knelt at my feet, with a mouthful of pins making tiny exacting adjustments to the ivory silk cascading around my legs. I stood on a circular pedestal, watching the traffic crawl past the glass, feeling a quiet, profound sense of stability. Ethan and I had navigated 14 months of intricate wedding logistics while managing our respective high-pressure careers. He spent his days burying fraudulent tech startups in corporate litigation, and I spent mine securing commercial real estate portfolios for a private equity firm. The finish line for our personal celebration was merely 3 days away. My phone rested on a velvet-tufted ottoman a few feet across the room. When the screen lit up and the device began vibrating against the upholstery, I assumed it was a final confirmation from our caterer or the florist checking a delivery time. I excused myself, stepping carefully down from the wooden pedestal, the heavy fabric rustling loudly against the hardwood floor. I picked up the phone. The caller identification displayed my sister Harper. Harper is 29 years old and possesses the terrifying ability to manipulate the atmosphere of a room simply by walking into it. She is the undisputed golden child of our household, a woman who treats every family dynamic like a stage play, where she holds the starring role, and the rest of us function merely as stagehands. I swiped the green button and raised the phone to my ear, preparing for a complaint about her bridesmaid dress fitting or a sudden inconvenient dietary restriction. Instead, her voice rushed through the speaker breathless and practically vibrating with giddy delight. "Emma," she chirped, the artificial sweetness in her tone setting my nerves on edge immediately. "I have the most incredible news. Logan and I just made a huge decision. We are tired of waiting for our own date next year. We want to be married right now this weekend." Logan is a software developer with a booming public persona, a man who constantly leverages his tech startup to project an image of extreme wealth and limitless influence to anyone who will listen. My stomach tightened, sensing the incoming impact of her erratic choices. "That is Sutton Harper," I replied, keeping my tone exceptionally mild. "Our wedding is this weekend. Are you saying you are going to elope before the ceremony?" Harper let out a musical, dismissive laugh. "Oh no. We are not eloping. We are having a real wedding. I just called your venue manager. We took over your reservation at the Cascade Glass Conservatory. It is the perfect location for Logan to host his investors, and since all our family is already flying into town, the timing is just flawless." I stood perfectly still, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The bustling boutique around me seemed to fade into a dull, muted blur. She had just casually announced the theft of my wedding venue 72 hours before the event, treating a highly coveted commercial property reservation like a borrowed sweater. "You can just find somewhere else to host your thing, Emma," she added, her voice dropping into a patronizing register. "The manager at the conservatory was so happy to help us out. You know how to scramble and put things together. Your little ceremony will be fine at a public park or something." Her voice carried a very specific breezy cadence of casual cruelty. Hearing it sent a physical jolt straight through my chest, instantly transporting me backward in time. I was no longer a 33-year-old senior director managing multi-million-dollar assets. I was 9 years old, standing in the driveway of my childhood home, gripping the handlebars of a bright red bicycle. I had saved my allowance for an entire year to buy that bicycle, hoarding wrinkled bills in a shoebox under my bed. The day I brought it home, Harper threw a screaming, inconsolable tantrum on the front lawn because she wanted to ride it first. My parents did not discipline her behavior. My mother knelt beside me, prying my fingers off the rubber grips. "Harper wants it, and you are the mature one, Emma," my mother had said, handing my hard-earned bicycle directly to my sister. "You are strong enough to let it go. Do not cause a scene." That single interaction became the foundational blueprint of my entire existence within that house. My worth in that family was strictly tied to my ability to vanish. To be loved, I had to shrink. To keep the peace, I had to surrender my joy, my achievements, and my space. If I complained, I was labeled difficult and jealous. If I stayed quiet, I was the reliable, invisible daughter. I did not scream into the receiver today. I did not hurl insults or demand an explanation for this monumental betrayal. Decades of swallowed grievances kept my outward demeanor chillingly placid. My thumb moved slightly on the glass screen of my phone, silently swiping down to the control center and tapping the red circular icon for the audio recording application. I needed a record of this conversation, a reflex honed by years of navigating treacherous corporate negotiations. "Oh, the manager just gave up the date," I asked, injecting a tone of mild, confused compliance into my voice. "That seems highly irregular for a premier property." Harper laughed again, eager to boast about her impending high society triumph. "Well, Logan had to grease the wheels a bit. He drove down there this morning and paid the booking manager a little expedition fee in cash to cancel your contract and slide our names onto the marquee. His investors require a certain aesthetic for the funding round, and your venue was the only place in the city that fit the bill. The manager voided your deposit and transferred the date right over to us." My pulse drummed a steady, relentless rhythm in my ears. She had just proudly confessed that her fiancé used an illicit cash bribe to induce commercial contract fraud. The audio application silently captured every single syllable of her gloating admission. I did not betray a fraction of the cold, lethal realization forming in my mind. "Well, congratulations to you and Logan," I said, projecting the exact submissive tone she expected to hear. "I will figure out my own arrangements." Harper offered a sickeningly sweet goodbye and ended the call. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, saving the audio file to an encrypted folder on my secure cloud drive. Then my legs gave out. I sank heavily onto the velvet ottoman, my hands trembling uncontrollably in my lap. The shaking did not stem from rage. It was the old familiar ghost of childhood helplessness rising to the surface, threatening to pull me under a wave of grief. My instinct, the trauma response drilled into me since I was a little girl, screamed at me to comply. It urged me to pick up the phone call my caterers, apologize profusely to my vendors, and scramble to find a cheap suburban patio to host my 200 guests. It told me to absorb the humiliation, bow my head, and let my sister steal the spotlight so my parents would not brand me a bitter, envious villain. The internal battle was agonizing and exhausting. I sat on the soft velvet cushion, fighting a desperate war between the traumatized, shrinking child who just wanted to be loved and the formidable, independent executive who negotiated corporate buyouts for a living. The little girl wanted to disappear into the background to keep the family intact. The executive knew that Logan had just committed a severe legal violation and that letting them get away with this would mean shrinking forever. I closed my eyes and focused on the rhythmic patter of the Seattle rain striking the boutique window. I took a long, deep breath, forcing the trembling in my fingers to subside. The air filling my lungs felt crisp and grounding, washing away the panic. I opened my eyes and looked across the room at my own reflection in the tall, gilded floor mirror. The ivory silk of my wedding gown hung beautifully still, half pinned by the seamstress, who was watching me with silent concern from the corner of the shop. I looked at the woman in the glass. She was not a helpless 9-year-old girl losing her prized possession. She was a professional who held the deed to her own life. I stood up from the ottoman, smoothing the delicate fabric of the bodice. I stared directly into my own eyes in the mirror, acknowledging the deep pain of their betrayal, but refusing to let it dictate my future. "Not this time," I whispered to the empty room. I left the bridal boutique with the audio file securely saved and my composure flawlessly restored. The drive across the city required navigating a labyrinth of slick, rain-washed streets, a journey that allowed my analytical mind to fully compartmentalize the emotional blow. My family believed I lived in a modest, unremarkable apartment in a generic suburban complex, a residence that perfectly matched their perception of my supposedly mediocre property management career. They viewed me as a struggling professional who scraped together enough funds for a decent wedding venue, only to be effortlessly brushed aside by their tech industry darling. I actively maintained that specific illusion because projecting an image of average success was the only way to avoid their constant parasitic financial demands and crushing jealousy. I pulled into the underground parking garage, bypassing the guest spaces and swiping my keycard to access the private restricted elevator bank. The digital display blinked green, and the polished steel car rocketed upward, bypassing the modest floors below. The door slid open silently, depositing me directly into the foyer of a sprawling $3 million penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered an unobstructed, breathtaking view of Puget Sound, the dark water churning under the gray Seattle sky. This was my actual sanctuary, a heavily guarded fortress purchased in cash and registered under a blind corporate trust to ensure my biological relatives never discovered the true magnitude of my private equity success. Ethan was already home. At 36, he possessed the sharp, intimidating intellect required to dismantle fraudulent technology startups for a premier corporate law firm. He was a litigator who thrived on uncovering hidden liabilities and exposing executives who believed their wealth made them immune to legal consequences. He stood in the expansive kitchen, wearing a crisp white dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up methodically, slicing vegetables on the marble island. He looked up as I dropped my keys onto the counter, his dark eyes instantly reading the shift in my posture. I did not greet him with tears or frantic complaints. I simply set my phone on the granite surface, opened the encrypted audio file, and pressed play. Harper's gleeful voice filled the quiet, temperature-controlled room, bragging about Logan paying the venue manager a cash expedition fee to steal our wedding date. Ethan stopped slicing immediately. He set the knife down, resting his hands flat against the cool stone island, listening to the confession with absolute chilling focus. He absorbed the sheer arrogance of the theft, his legal mind automatically classifying the actions described on the recording. The audio file ended, leaving a heavy silence hanging in the air. Ethan picked up a towel, slowly wiping his hands, his expression hardening into a look of profound professional disgust. He just confessed to commercial bribery. Ethan stated, his voice a low, steady rumble that commanded the space. Logan handed an employee an undisclosed cash payment to induce a fraudulent breach of a signed contract. That is a clear violation of state business statutes, and depending on how he categorized that cash withdrawal, it could easily trigger a federal banking inquiry. The venue manager is equally culpable for accepting the illicit funds and voiding a legitimate reservation without cause. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms defensively. "Good," I replied, the icy edge of retaliation sharpening my tone. "We can crush him before Friday." Logan brags endlessly about his upcoming Series A funding round. His entire tech persona is built on projecting invincibility to his angel investors. I know which venture capital firm is reviewing his portfolio. You represent their primary board members. If you make one call and mention that their prospective founder is actively bribing local businesses and engaging in commercial fraud, they will pull his funding instantly. His fake startup will collapse, and he will not have a dime left to pay for the catering at his stolen wedding. I expected Ethan to nod in agreement, to pick up his phone and deliver the fatal strike that would obliterate Logan's arrogant empire. Instead, Ethan stopped moving entirely. The cold, predatory energy in his posture vanished, replaced by a rigid, unyielding stillness. He looked directly into my eyes, and the silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. He did not reach for his device. "That firm is my client, M," Ethan said softly, shaking his head. "I cannot leverage confidential relationships to execute a personal vendetta. If I touch this, if I use my position as their outside counsel to anonymously sabotage a founder's funding round based on a private family dispute, I cross a massive ethical boundary. I could be disbarred." He took a slow breath, stepping closer to me. "The anger is justified, but this has to be clean or it does not happen at all." The refusal hit me like a physical barrier. For the first time since leaving the boutique, a genuine spark of frustration flared in my chest. The most potent immediate weapon in our arsenal had just been permanently removed from the table. I could not simply deploy my powerful husband to eradicate the threat with a convenient phone call. I stared at him, the urge to demand retribution fighting against the undeniable logic of his stance. He was enforcing a hard limit, refusing to let the chaos of my family contaminate his professional integrity. "You have spent your entire life letting those people define you as the villain," Ethan continued, his voice softening into a quiet, anchoring rhythm. "They gaslit you. They stole your bicycle when you were 9, and they are trying to steal your wedding venue today. They want you to react with explosive anger so they can point fingers and claim you are the unstable, vindictive sister they always said you were. Do not prove them right." His words stripped away the reactionary fury, exposing the raw, vulnerable core of the conflict. This was no longer just a logistical battle over a hotel reservation. Ethan was holding up a moral mirror, forcing me to confront the exact nature of the retaliation I was about to unleash. He loved me fiercely, but he was demanding that my pursuit of justice not corrode my own character. If I bypassed legal ethics and used back-channel manipulation to ruin Logan, I became exactly like Harper, a person who believed rules did not apply to them, a person who crushed others simply because they possessed the power to do so. "We do not take shortcuts," Ethan insisted, reaching out to gently hold my shoulders. "We do not commit corporate espionage, and we do not violate professional boundaries. If we are going to dismantle this illusion they have built, we do it in the broad daylight. We do it using only the tools we legitimately control, and we let their own fraudulent actions dictate their downfall. No illegal maneuvers, no dirty tricks." I looked into his dark eyes, the chaotic noise in my head finally settling into a sharp, crystalline focus. The desire for a fast, messy victory evaporated, replaced by the profound realization that true retribution required absolute discipline. He was right. A sloppy emotional attack would only give my parents the ammunition they desperately craved to maintain their golden child narrative. I needed to execute a strike so structurally flawless that they could not blame anyone but themselves. "Okay," I agreed, my voice dropping to a calm, resolute whisper. "We play it entirely by the book. We use only what I legally control." I will not ask you to compromise your firm, and I will not resort to their level of deceit. The trap will be constructed from their own arrogance." Ethan offered a small, proud smile, relieved that the tempest had passed without destroying our foundation. He turned back toward the kitchen island, picking up his knife to resume preparing dinner, completely unaware of the massive scale of the operation I was about to initiate. I watched him chop vegetables for a moment, gathering the courage to unveil a secret I had meticulously guarded for years. I walked slowly out of the kitchen, navigating the wide hallway toward my private home office. The room was a sterile environment of glass and steel, dominated by dual monitors and heavy filing cabinets. I approached a sleek metal credenza tucked into the far corner. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner securing the top drawer. The lock flashed a bright, validating green, and the heavy metal slid open smoothly. Inside rested a collection of heavily classified corporate portfolios, the tangible proof of the empire I had quietly built while my family thought I was barely surviving. I bypassed the standard investment files and reached for a single thick manila folder buried at the very bottom. I pulled the document out, keeping the embossed corporate letterhead turned deliberately away from the doorway. I ran my hand over the thick cardstock, feeling the immense crushing weight of the legal authority contained within its pages. Ethan appeared in the doorway of the office, holding a dish towel, his expression curious as he watched me handle the confidential file. I looked up at him, the weight of a lifetime of enforced invisibility finally lifting from my shoulders. "There is something I never told my family," I said softly, staring down at the sealed folder. "I never told you either." Before I could fully articulate the magnitude of the secret contained within that folder, the sharp, invasive ringing of my cell phone shattered the quiet intimacy of my home office. The caller identification displayed a combined contact name, Cynthia and Thomas. The coordinated assault had officially commenced. My parents rarely utilized speakerphone for casual check-ins. A joint call invariably signaled a unified, highly orchestrated effort to secure my immediate compliance. They had undoubtedly spent the last hour strategizing the most effective psychological angles to ensure I surrendered the Cascade Glass Conservatory without causing a scene. I placed the manila folder carefully onto the glass surface of my desk, keeping the embossed logo hidden, and took a slow, stabilizing breath. I pressed the green icon and activated the speaker function, allowing the conversation to broadcast clearly across the room. Ethan stepped silently into the office, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, his posture radiating a quiet, unyielding support. "Emma, darling." My mother's voice fluttered through the speaker, dripping with a manufactured, wounded reasonableness. Her tone was carefully modulated to project immense maternal concern, completely masking the toxic manipulation lying just beneath the surface. "We just heard the news from Harper. We are calling because we want to make sure you are handling this sudden change of plans with the appropriate grace." I stared at the glowing screen of the phone, marveling at her ability to immediately frame the theft of my wedding venue as a minor scheduling inconvenience. "I am handling it, Mom," I replied, maintaining a neutral, non-committal cadence. "Your sister is under an incredible amount of stress right now." My father interjected, his voice carrying the heavy, authoritative boom he perfected during decades of mid-level corporate management. "Logan is finalizing a massive round of venture capital funding this weekend. His primary angel investors are flying in from Silicon Valley, and they expect to see a demonstration of profound success. It is absolutely critical that Logan projects stability and extreme wealth to secure this capital. Your little ceremony at the conservatory was a nice idea, Emma, but Harper and Logan require that specific high society aesthetic to guarantee their future. It is a very fair sacrifice for the greater good of the family's rising star." The sheer audacity of his rationalization hung thickly in the air. My father was not operating out of pure malice. He was functioning under a deeply warped, deeply ingrained internal logic. In his mind, Logan represented a golden ticket to elite social circles and immense financial prestige, a level of success Thomas had chased but never achieved. He genuinely believed that sacrificing my happiness to facilitate Logan's illusion of wealth was a necessary, pragmatic business decision. He viewed my wedding as a trivial, disposable asset that could be easily traded to protect the family's ultimate investment. "We know it is disappointing, Emma." My mother continued, adopting a soothing, patronizing rhythm. "But you must look at the bigger picture. You and Ethan can easily relocate your event. Your father thinks that lovely public park over on the Olympic Peninsula would be perfect for your budget. It is very rustic. You can set up some folding chairs and have a beautiful, intimate afternoon. We just need you to be the mature one here and surrender the venue graciously so Harper is not embarrassed in front of Logan's colleagues." A cold, familiar weight began to press down heavily on my chest. It was the exact same emotional pressure I had endured for 33 years. They were deploying the oldest weapon in their arsenal, expertly twisting the narrative to cast my legitimate grievance as a character flaw. "Do not make this difficult," Emma Thomas warned, the paternal warmth vanishing from his tone, replaced by a sharp warning edge. "You have always struggled with jealousy regarding your sister. You could never stand to see Harper shine. We are asking you to step back and support her happiness for once in your life. Do not let your bitter resentment ruin her special weekend." The accusations struck with surgical precision. The little girl who handed over her red bicycle suddenly surfaced, her throat tight with the desperate, agonizing need to please. I felt my posture instinctively slump my shoulders, rounding as the lifelong conditioning threatened to override my adult autonomy. The instinct to shrink, to apologize for taking up space, flooded my nervous system. "Okay." I started to say the word, slipping out in a small, fractured whisper. "I understand. I can—" Ethan uncrossed his arms. He did not speak, but he slowly, firmly shook his head. His dark eyes locked onto mine, offering a silent, powerful anchor in the middle of the storm. He was watching me teeter on the precipice of capitulation, waiting to see if I would let them push me back into the dark. I stopped mid-sentence. The silence on the line stretched out for 3 agonizing seconds. The psychological spell suddenly snapped, breaking cleanly in 2. I recognized the exact script they were reading from. It was the script designed to erase my existence, the one that had trained me to believe my boundaries were inherently selfish. I felt a sudden profound shift in my chest as the terrified child finally retreated, allowing the senior director of private equity to take total control. I did not scream at the phone. I did not launch into a passionate defense of my finances or loudly announce a declaration of war. Arguing with a delusion only validates its premise. Instead, I straightened my spine, drawing a deep, fortifying breath. "I hear you," I said, my voice echoing with an even chillingly flat resonance that offered 0 emotional footholds. "I will handle it." "Oh, thank goodness." Cynthia sighed, the relief in her voice, genuine and immediate. She heard the words she expected to hear, interpreting my calm response as total, unconditional surrender. "We knew you would be sensible about this, Emma. We will see you at the park on Sunday. Do not forget to cancel your caterers so you do not lose your deposits." The line clicked dead. They hung up completely satisfied, firmly believing they had successfully bullied me into submission. Their complacency was absolute. They had absolutely no idea they had just armed the trap. I sat in the quiet office, staring blankly at the dark screen of my phone. The emotional severance was complete. There was no lingering anger, no frantic desire to explain myself. There was only a quiet, heavy mourning for the parents I had always hoped they would become, and the stark acceptance of who they truly were. Ethan walked slowly across the room, stopping beside my desk. He reached out and gently rested his hand on my shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. I looked up at him, the final vestiges of my childhood illusions fading away. "They think I am still 9 years old," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "And that is the only reason this is going to work." I reached for a yellow legal pad resting near my keyboard and picked up a heavy silver pen. I did not write down a list of alternative parks or catering cancellation numbers. I wrote down a single name, the booking manager who had accepted Logan's illicit $20,000 cash bribe. I pressed the tip of the pen firmly against the paper, drawing a single sharp underline beneath his name. The mourning period was officially over. The tactician had fully awakened. The sharp underline beneath the booking manager's name felt definitive, a firm separation between the passive daughter I used to be and the executive I had become. I set the heavy silver pen down on the glass desk. The silence in the home office stretched thick with the unsaid truth resting inside the locked drawer of my credenza. Ethan stood beside me, his hand still resting supportively on my shoulder. He knew I possessed significant leverage within the commercial real estate sector, but he had never pushed for the exact details of my localized portfolios. He respected the fierce boundaries I had erected to protect my hard-earned assets from the parasitic reach of my biological relatives. But the rules of engagement had fundamentally shifted today, and maintaining total secrecy was no longer a viable strategy. I slid my chair back, stepping away from the desk. I walked over to the sleek metal credenza, bypassing the biometric lock, and pulled out the thick manila folder I had retrieved earlier. I carried it back to the center of the room, my heart maintaining a slow, highly regulated rhythm. I placed the folder on the desk and slowly turned it around, revealing the embossed corporate logo to Ethan. It bore the crest of Summit Hospitality Holdings, a massive regional conglomerate known for operating the most exclusive event spaces in the Pacific Northwest. Ethan looked at the logo, his sharp legal mind instantly calculating the implications. He looked up at me, a question forming in his dark eyes. I took a deep breath, preparing to expose the magnitude of the power I had deliberately kept hidden. 6 months ago, I began keeping my voice incredibly measured. My private equity firm initiated a highly aggressive, completely unpublicized corporate buyout of Summit Hospitality Holdings. The negotiations were brutal, but we successfully secured the controlling interest. To shield my personal identity from any public tax registries or corporate filings, I restructured the acquisition through an irrevocable blind trust. I am the sole managing partner of that trust, Ethan. Ethan's gaze dropped back to the folder. He traced the embossed letters with his index finger. Summit operates the Cascade Glass Conservatory. He stated the realization locking into place with breathtaking precision. Yes, I confirmed the reality of my ownership settling heavily into the room. Harper and Logan did not just steal a venue reservation from a helpless sister. They walked into a building I physically own. The corrupt booking manager, who accepted Logan's $20,000 cash bribe, is technically speaking my direct subordinate employee. He did not simply cancel a valid contract. He lacked the executive authorization to void my proprietary hold on the property. Logan's illicit cash payment induced that manager to fraudulently double-book a premier commercial asset that belongs exclusively to me. By doing so, they heavily exposed my own holding company to severe legal liability. From a strict statutory perspective, Harper and Logan are not legitimate clients holding a valid reservation. They are hostile trespassers occupying the premises through documented commercial fraud. The legal mechanics of the situation were flawless. There was no ambiguity, no gray area where my parents could claim it was merely a domestic dispute over a calendar date. It was a severe, prosecutable breach of contract. Ethan let out a low, almost imperceptible whistle. A slow smile spread across his face, not a grin of malicious joy, but the deep, satisfying recognition of an airtight legal victory. The ethics problem he had wrestled with earlier, the inability to use his own firm's leverage against Logan's venture capital investors, was instantly resolved. We did not need external leverage. I held the absolute authority to demolish their stolen wedding, using the legitimate, unassailable power of my own corporate ownership. "You have the deed," Ethan murmured, his voice laced with profound respect. "You hold the master key to the entire property. Emma, you can shut this down before they even print the seating charts." He was right. The solution was blindingly simple. I looked at the heavy manila folder, feeling the immense crushing weight of the authority I possessed. But instead of the triumphant rush, I expected a cold, heavy knot of reluctance tightened in my chest. I stared at the paperwork, my mind flashing back to the vicious accusations my parents had hurled at me just an hour ago. "You have always been jealous. You are a bitter, vindictive girl who cannot stand to see anyone else happy." I stepped away from the desk, crossing my arms defensively. I could end this right now, I admitted, my voice dropping to a fragile, vulnerable whisper. I could pick up this phone call the regional director of Summit Hospitality and order an immediate hard cancellation of their fraudulent contract. I could have security lock the iron gates of the conservatory tonight. But Ethan, I do not want to be someone who ends things with one ruthless phone call. The admission hung in the quiet air of the penthouse. This was the true agonizing core of my internal conflict. My family had spent 3 decades conditioning me to believe that any assertion of my own boundaries was inherently aggressive and selfish. They had relentlessly painted me as a monster whenever I refused to shrink. Wielding this massive, devastating corporate power to crush my sister's wedding felt dangerously close to validating their lifelong smear campaign. If I obliterated their event with a single unilateral decree, I risked becoming the exact tyrant they always claimed I was. Ethan closed the distance between us, placing his hands gently on my arms, grounding me in the present reality. He looked directly into my eyes, seeing past the frightened child, and focusing entirely on the capable woman standing before him. "Then do not crush them," Ethan said softly, his tone offering a steady, unwavering moral compass. "Do not act out of vengeance or spite. Act out of legal necessity. You are the managing partner of a multi-million-dollar holding company. You have a fiduciary duty to protect your assets from commercial fraud and employee corruption. Enforcing a valid contract and terminating an employee who accepted a bribe is not an act of jealousy. It is the definition of accountability." He paused, letting the distinction settle deep into my mind. There is a massive difference between crushing someone for sport and simply refusing to absorb the impact of their terrible choices. Ethan continued, "Do not protect them from the consequences of their own arrogance. Just stop shrinking to accommodate their lies." The fog of childhood guilt finally lifted, replaced by a crystalline, unyielding clarity. Ethan was right. I did not need to launch a preemptive emotional strike. I did not need to scream or engage in their toxic drama. I simply needed to let the machinery of their own fraud collapse under its own unsustainable weight. The strategy instantly crystallized in my mind. "We will not cancel the event prematurely," I decided, my voice gaining strength and absolute certainty. "We will let them keep the stolen reservation for now. We will let Harper purchase the expensive floral arrangements. We will let Logan invite his elite tech investors and boast about his high society connections. We will allow their arrogance to reach its absolute, undeniable peak. And then, when the fraud is fully exposed, we will execute the cancellation publicly, utilizing the strict, uncompromising letter of the law. They will not be able to spin this as a jealous sister throwing a tantrum. They will be forced to explain a formal corporate eviction to 200 distinguished guests." Ethan nodded slowly in agreement, recognizing the elegance of the plan. It was a strategy devoid of malice, built entirely on the foundation of objective consequence. They had chosen to build a fantasy on stolen ground, and I was simply going to remove the foundation. I walked out of the home office and stepped into the expansive living room, pausing near the cedar side table that held the framed architectural rendering of the Cascade Glass Conservatory. I picked up the heavy silver frame, running my thumb over the polished glass, tracing the elegant lines of the building's soaring atrium. The image no longer represented a stolen dream or a painful reminder of my family's betrayal. "My whole life they told me to disappear," I said softly, looking at the beautiful structural integrity of the conservatory. "I bought the room instead." The decision to let the fraudulent booking stand for the moment provided a tactical advantage, but the sheer scale of the deceit demanded a thorough investigation into the man orchestrating it. Logan projected the flawless image of a Seattle tech visionary, loudly boasting about seed funding and disruptive software algorithms at every family gathering. He wore the expensive tailored suits, drove the heavily leased luxury electric vehicles, and spoke in a constant stream of Silicon Valley jargon that dazzled my parents into absolute submission. However, a man who casually drops $20,000 in cash to bribe a venue manager is rarely running a legitimate, transparent enterprise. The desperation required to execute such a sloppy, high-risk maneuver screamed of profound financial instability. Ethan and I spent the next 24 hours operating in a state of quiet, hyper-focused intensity, transforming our dining table into a secure staging ground for a deep, localized audit. Using only the tools I could legally access through my private equity firm's research division and publicly available corporate registry databases, I began pulling the structural threads of Logan's celebrated startup. The initial findings were immediately alarming. His company, registered as Apex Cloud Solutions, maintained a glossy, highly optimized website filled with stock photos of diverse, smiling employees and vague mission statements about revolutionizing data storage. Yet when I cross-referenced the company's registered address with commercial leasing records, I discovered they did not actually occupy the sprawling downtown office space listed on their contact page. They rented a single, unstaffed virtual mailbox in a strip mall near Bellevue. The physical infrastructure of his booming tech empire simply did not exist. Ethan sat across the table, utilizing his extensive knowledge of corporate litigation to scrutinize the public filings Logan had submitted to the state. The deeper we dug, the more the illusion fractured. The board of directors listed on the incorporation documents consisted entirely of Logan's college fraternity brothers, none of whom possessed any actual background in software development or financial management. The aggressive growth metrics he constantly touted to my parents were completely unsubstantiated by any visible revenue streams or registered patents. The entire company appeared to be an empty shell, a hollow, brilliantly marketed facade designed specifically to attract venture capital without ever producing a viable product. We have the structure of a classic Ponzi scheme, I noted, tracing my finger over a printed spreadsheet, detailing a series of highly erratic, low-level wire transfers. He is taking early-round investments and using that capital to fund his personal lifestyle and pay off initial debts, projecting an image of wealth to attract the next larger tier of funding. That is why he is so desperate to host this lavish wedding at the conservatory. He needs the aesthetic of extreme success to convince the major investors that his company is thriving. Ethan leaned back, running a hand through his dark hair, his expression grim. "We have the outline of the fraud, Emma," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "But an outline is not a federal indictment. We can prove he lied on a venue contract, but proving massive corporate embezzlement requires access to the internal financial ledgers. We need to see the actual flow of the venture capital money to definitively prove he is siphoning the funds." That realization brought our investigation to a sudden jarring halt. We had hit a massive, impenetrable wall. The definitive proof, the smoking gun that would transform our suspicions into undeniable federal charges, was securely locked inside the private encrypted servers of the venture capital firm currently underwriting Logan's fraudulent startup. And that specific venture capital firm was one of the premier clients represented by Ethan's corporate law practice. The ethical boundary we had discussed earlier suddenly morphed from a theoretical concept into a crushing, restrictive reality. I stared at the incomplete evidence board we had assembled on the dining table. We possessed a flawless, legally sound audio recording of Harper confessing to the $20,000 cash bribe. We had the authority to evict them from the conservatory and publicly humiliate them on their wedding day. But without the internal financial data, Logan's larger, far more destructive crimes would remain entirely hidden. He could easily spin the loss of the venue as a bureaucratic error or a spiteful act of a jealous sister. He would survive the embarrassment, retain his stolen funding, and continue his fraudulent operation untouched. "Just look at their secondary ledgers, Ethan." I urged, the frustration boiling over, threatening to crack my carefully maintained composure. "You have the access codes. It would take you 5 minutes to log into your firm's client portal and verify the embezzlement. You do not even have to download the files. Just confirm the account deficits. If we can prove he is stealing from your clients, we can shut down his entire fake empire before he ruins anyone else." Ethan did not move. He did not reach for his encrypted laptop resting on the edge of the table. His jaw clenched, the muscles working visibly beneath his skin as he absorbed the intensity of my demand. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating, and loaded with the sudden sharp friction of a genuine relationship conflict. This was not a frictionless television drama where the powerful lawyer seamlessly breaks the law to save his partner. This was reality, and the stakes involved his entire professional existence. "I cannot do it, M." Ethan stated, his voice flat and uncompromising. "That firm is my client. The moment I use my confidential access to investigate a target based on a private personal vendetta, I violate attorney-client privilege. I breach my fiduciary duty. If I cross that line, I am not just risking my partnership at the firm. I am risking disbarment. I lose my license, my career, and everything I have built. I will not destroy my life to prove your sister is marrying a criminal." The rejection stung, a sharp, bitter reminder of my own limitations. For the first time since this ordeal began, my meticulous, calculated plan felt entirely insufficient. I was furious, not just at Ethan's refusal, but at the infuriating reality of the situation. I hated the fact that I was constrained by the very rules and ethical standards that people like Harper and Logan casually ignored to achieve their goals. They operated with ruthless impunity, and I was forced to fight them with one hand tied behind my back. I paced the length of the dining room, the adrenaline making my movements sharp and erratic. If we only expose the bribe, he walks away from the real crime, I argued, gesturing forcefully at the scattered documents. He gets to keep playing the victim. He keeps the money. He keeps the narrative. It is not enough. Then we have to trust that the system will catch him, Ethan countered, standing up to meet my gaze, refusing to back down from the ethical line he had drawn. We document the bribe. We expose the commercial fraud regarding the venue. We hand that specific legally obtained evidence over to the proper compliance officers, and we let the subsequent investigation follow its natural course. If his company is truly a shell, exposing his willingness to commit bribery will inevitably trigger a wider audit. We light the match, Emma, but we do not pour the gasoline. His insistence on restraint was agonizing, yet I knew deep down he was entirely correct. If I bullied him into compromising his integrity, I would inflict profound damage on the only person who had ever offered me unconditional support. I stopped pacing, forcing myself to exhale a long, shuddering breath, accepting the bitter taste of an incomplete victory. The satisfying, instantaneous annihilation I craved was not going to happen. The outcome was now genuinely uncertain, reliant on external authorities who had never once protected me in the past. I walked back to the table, my eyes scanning the documents we had gathered. As I sifted through the public and corporation filings one last time, a specific detail I had previously overlooked suddenly caught my attention. It was a secondary signature line on a substantial commercial loan agreement Logan had secured during his initial seed funding phase. The primary guarantor was listed as Apex Cloud Solutions, but the secondary personal guarantor required to secure the massive line of credit was a name I recognized instantly. My father Thomas had co-signed the loan. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin cold and clammy. The realization hit me with the devastating force of a physical blow. My parents were not just emotionally invested in Logan's success. They were legally and financially tethered to his fraudulent enterprise. Thomas had blindly pledged his own assets, likely leveraging the equity in his suburban home, to guarantee a loan for a company that possessed zero actual revenue. If Logan's venture capital scheme collapsed, the banks would immediately target the secondary guarantor to recover the missing funds. My parents were inextricably tangled in a massive federal fraud, and they had absolutely no idea how deep the danger went. I stared at the signature line, a profound sense of dread settling heavily in my stomach. The collateral damage of this exposure was going to be catastrophic. "It is not enough," I repeated softly, looking at the incomplete evidence board, the weight of the impending destruction feeling heavier than ever before. Ethan stepped forward, placing his hand firmly over mine. "Then we do the part that is enough," he said, his voice a steady grounding force in the chaotic room. "And we do it right." The fragile, disciplined restraint Ethan and I established in the home office faced its first brutal assault early Wednesday morning. The digital bombardment began before I even finished my first cup of coffee. My phone resting on the kitchen island erupted into a chaotic, sustained vibration, the screen lighting up with a rapid-fire sequence of notifications. The alerts were not standard emails or calendar reminders. They were direct messages, social media tags, and furious texts pouring in from dozens of extended relatives and family acquaintances. Harper had officially launched her preemptive strike, weaponizing the narrative long before I could even formulate a public response. I unlocked the device, my thumb hovering over the screen, bracing for the inevitable toxicity. Harper had posted a heavily filtered, highly orchestrated photograph to her primary social media account. The image depicted her standing gracefully beneath the soaring glass arches of the Cascade Glass Conservatory, holding a pristine mock bouquet, looking pensively toward the natural light. It was a masterpiece of manufactured vulnerability. The caption beneath the photo, however, was a vicious, expertly crafted piece of character assassination. Sometimes stepping up for family means making unexpected sacrifices. Harper had written her words dripping with artificial grace. My heart breaks for Emma, who tragically realized at the absolute last minute that her financial situation simply could not support the demands of her dream venue. Bankruptcy is a terrifying reality, and pride often makes asking for help impossible. Logan and I could not bear to see such a beautiful date go to waste, so we graciously stepped in, assumed the massive financial burden, and secured the conservatory to save the weekend. True love always finds a way, even when recovering from a sister's devastating financial collapse. She had tagged the venue several prominent local wedding vendors and dozens of our mutual family contacts, ensuring the lie achieved maximum saturation. By framing my silent compliance as a humiliating, catastrophic bankruptcy, she cast herself as the benevolent savior, rescuing a ruined weekend through her own supposedly superior wealth. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the fabrication was staggering. She was standing in a building I owned, falsely claiming I was too destitute to afford the rent, while her fiancé was actively embezzling funds to pay for the floral arrangements. The fallout was instantaneous and merciless. The extended family, a collection of aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who constantly sought my parents' approval, eagerly accepted the narrative without a single question. My inbox filled with a toxic sludge of condescension and faux sympathy. Aunt Carol sent a lengthy paragraph expressing her profound disappointment in my reckless spending habits, demanding I apologize to Harper for causing such immense family stress. Cousin Greg texted a single mocking sentence telling me to stop acting like a jealous narcissist and grow up. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the screen, my jaw clenched so tightly the muscles ached. I wanted to believe that the absurd accusations did not bother me. I wanted to project the image of an untouchable, ice-cold executive who remained entirely unfazed by the petty squabbles of inferior relatives. But that was a convenient, frictionless fantasy. The reality was incredibly painful. The smear campaign was highly effective, and the sheer volume of the hatred directed at me felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Then a specific message appeared that shattered my remaining composure. It was from Eleanor, a retired university professor who had been my primary mentor during my undergraduate studies. She was a brilliant, compassionate woman who had recognized my potential long before I entered the private equity sector. She was a surrogate mother figure, someone whose opinion I valued deeply. Her message was brief, stark, and entirely devoid of her usual warmth. Emma. I am profoundly saddened by the news circulating this morning, Eleanor had written. Financial difficulties are understandable, but allowing your pride to create such a disruptive crisis for your sister is incredibly disappointing. I always believed you possessed stronger character. I will not be attending any alternate arrangements this weekend. I need time to reevaluate our relationship. The words struck with the precision of a sniper round. The loss landed heavily, a sharp, suffocating ache that bypassed my professional armor and struck the vulnerable core I tried so desperately to protect. My attempt to maintain a dignified legal silence was actively being misinterpreted as an admission of guilt. The people I genuinely cared about, the individuals who formed my chosen support system, were turning away poisoned by Harper's relentless lies. For a terrifying, agonizing moment, staying quiet felt exactly like losing. It felt like allowing the bullies to rewrite my history and destroy my reputation without a fight. I stared at Eleanor's message, the urge to retaliate burning intensely in my veins. My fingers hovered frantically over the keyboard. I began drafting a blistering, comprehensive public response. I typed out the truth about Logan's $20,000 cash bribe. I typed out the fact that I held the deed to the conservatory through a blind trust. I wanted to humiliate Harper instantly, to prove to Eleanor and everyone else that I was not a broke, pathetic failure. I wanted to burn their smug narrative to the ground with undeniable, explosive facts. Ethan walked into the kitchen carrying his briefcase ready to leave for his law firm. He saw the tension radiating from my posture, the frantic movement of my hands across the screen. He set the briefcase down and stepped behind my chair, his presence a quiet, grounding anchor. He did not ask what I was doing. He looked over my shoulder, reading the defensive, angry paragraph I was constructing. He placed his hand gently over mine, stopping the frantic typing. Wait, he said, his voice a low, steady murmur. Do not hit send. I looked up at him, my vision blurring with unshed tears of pure frustration. I cannot just let them say this, Ethan. I argued, my voice tight and trembling. Eleanor believes them. Aunt Carol believes them. They are treating me like a criminal because I refuse to scream back. If I do not defend myself right now, they win the narrative. Ethan squeezed my hand, offering a silent, unwavering reassurance. Defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you is just another way of shrinking, he explained quietly. If you post that rebuttal, you are reacting to their timeline. You are playing their game, engaging in a public mudslinging contest that validates their drama. You are trying to prove your worth to an audience that does not respect you. His words cut through the chaotic noise in my head, exposing the ugly truth behind my impulse. The desire to justify myself, to frantically explain my innocence, was not an act of strength. It was the old, deeply ingrained instinct of the 9-year-old girl desperately trying to appease a family that would never love her. It was the exact same shrinking mechanism, simply dressed in a new aggressive costume. True power does not require a frantic public defense. True power requires the discipline to endure the discomfort of being misunderstood until the undeniable truth reveals itself. I stared at the drafted message for a long, agonizing moment. The pain of Eleanor's rejection was a sharp, bitter pill to swallow, a genuine cost for maintaining my strategic silence. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to accept the loss, recognizing that a truly clean victory required sacrificing the immediate messy satisfaction of a social media argument. I highlighted the entire angry paragraph and hit delete. The screen went blank, mirroring the sudden exhausting emptiness in my chest. I chose silence, not because I was unaffected, but because I finally possessed the hard-won discipline to endure the temporary humiliation for the sake of the ultimate execution. The choice cost me dearly, leaving a raw, aching void, but it was necessary. While Harper and my parents gloated in their toxic echo chamber, fully convinced they had orchestrated my complete social and financial ruin, Ethan and I shifted our focus to the reality we actually controlled. We did not panic, and we did not retreat to a cheap suburban park to hide in shame. Instead, we spent the afternoon quietly, privately reaching out to our actual 200 guests. We contacted the corporate titans, the loyal friends, and the high-level executives who formed our genuine community. We did not offer long, dramatic explanations or boast about an extravagant backup venue to prove our wealth. We simply and seamlessly redirected the invitations. I had quietly decided that the Cascade Glass Conservatory, despite its architectural beauty and my ownership, was tainted by the memory of my family's deceit. I did not want to exchange vows in a room soaked in their manipulation. We moved the ceremony to a genuinely meaningful location, the private, expansive library of the historic downtown club, where Ethan and I had first met during a complex legal seminar. It was a space defined by intellect, quiet elegance, and authentic connection, rather than performative luxury. By Thursday evening, the isolation was profound. My biological family remained entirely silent, comfortably wrapped in their delusion of absolute victory. Their complacency was now total, their arrogance unchecked by any resistance from my end. The decoy had worked flawlessly. I sat alone on the edge of our living room sofa, the city lights reflecting off the dark waters of the Sound below. I held my phone in my hand, reading Eleanor's disappointed message one final time, letting the sting of her rejection settle completely into my reality. I did not try to brush it off or pretend it did not matter. I accepted the pain as the necessary price of my emancipation. I set the phone face down on the glass coffee table, severing the connection to their toxic world. "Let them think I lost," I said softly into the quiet room. Ethan walked into the living room carrying 2 glasses of water. He handed me one, his dark eyes searching my face, assessing the emotional toll the day had taken. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle and completely devoid of judgment. I looked at him, the man who had stood by me without demanding I compromise my integrity, and I allowed myself a moment of absolute unguarded honesty. A long, silent beat passed between us. "No," I said honestly, the vulnerability feeling strange but liberating. "But I will be." The delicate equilibrium I had achieved by Friday morning was brutally shattered before I even finished my morning review of the European market indices. A secure, encrypted alert flashed across my primary monitor, originating directly from the internal compliance software running the back-end operations of Summit Hospitality Holdings. As the managing partner of the Blind Trust, my system was configured to trigger an immediate notification whenever unauthorized bulk data deletions occurred within any of our subsidiary networks. I clicked the blinking red icon, my eyes scanning the rapidly populating system logs. The corrupt booking manager, the man who had eagerly accepted Logan's $20,000 cash bribe, was actively purging his digital footprint. He was systematically wiping the localized server, deleting the altered calendar reservations, the fabricated invoice records, and the internal email communications detailing the sudden venue transfer. My breath caught in my throat. This was not a routine system error. This was a frantic, desperate cover-up. The manager had clearly been tipped off, likely by a low-level auditor within the holding company, asking routine compliance questions, and had realized the corporate ownership was closing in on his illicit activities. "He is running," I stated, my voice sharp and tight with sudden adrenaline. I swiveled my chair away from the monitors, my mind racing through the catastrophic implications of the deleted files. Ethan looked up from his legal briefs, the relaxed morning atmosphere instantly vanishing. He walked over to my desk, leaning over my shoulder to read the scrolling system alerts. The deletion protocols were executing with terrifying speed. "What exactly is he wiping?" Ethan asked, his tone dropping into a focused, analytical register. "The primary evidence chain," I replied, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, debating whether to initiate an emergency server freeze that would inevitably reveal my identity prematurely. "He is erasing the fraudulent double booking records. If he successfully deletes the modified digital contracts before the system creates an off-site backup, my cleanest, most undeniable proof of commercial bribery evaporates. I can prove I own the building, but without the altered ledger, I cannot definitively prove he accepted a bribe to displace a legitimate reservation. It will look like a simple administrative error, a scheduling mistake." The situation deteriorated rapidly. A second alert pinged on my phone. It was an automated notification from the building security system at the Cascade Glass Conservatory. The booking manager's electronic access badge had just been used to exit the executive parking garage. He was not just deleting files, he was physically abandoning his post, likely planning to skip town and disappear before the corporate auditors arrived to demand an explanation. But the fleeing manager was only the initial fracture in our carefully constructed plan. The true disaster arrived 10 minutes later. I had been monitoring Logan's public business profiles through an anonymous tracker, keeping a close eye on his social media activity to ensure he remained comfortably arrogant. The tracker suddenly lit up with a flurry of highly irregular activity. Logan's startup company page was abruptly pulled offline, citing unexpected server maintenance. His personal profiles switched from public to restricted, and 3 prominent posts boasting about his upcoming venture capital funding were abruptly deleted. He knows, I whispered, staring at the darkened screens of Logan's digital footprint. The manager must have warned him before he fled. He must have told Logan that the holding company was asking questions and that the venue ownership structure was not what it appeared to be. For the very first time since the theft of my wedding, Logan sensed genuine danger. He realized he was not dealing with a gullible local event planner. He had stumbled into the crosshairs of a massive corporate entity, and he was actively beginning to cover his tracks. My careful, patient, strictly legal strategy was unraveling in real time, right in front of my eyes. The trap I had so meticulously designed relied entirely on their arrogant complacency. Now the prey was spooked, and the evidence was actively being destroyed. The panic I had successfully suppressed earlier in the week surged back, a cold, suffocating wave threatening to pull me under. "Ethan, they are scrubbing the data," I said, standing up from my desk, my voice vibrating with a desperate, frantic energy. "Logan is going to hide the embezzled venture capital funds. He's going to wipe his servers, and if he destroys the financial links, the investors will never find the missing money. He will walk away clean. He gets to keep the stolen venue, Harper gets to play the triumphant victim, and they both escape without a single consequence." I paced the length of the home office, the overwhelming urge to abandon my principles roaring in my ears. I looked at Ethan, my eyes pleading with him to intervene. "You have the access codes, Ethan. You can access the venture capital firm's secure portal right now. You can download Logan's preliminary financial disclosures and lock down his accounts before he finishes hiding the stolen seed money. If we do not act right this second, we lose everything." Ethan stood perfectly still, his jaw clenched, his dark eyes radiating a mixture of profound sympathy and unyielding professional discipline. The tension between us was a physical entity, heavy and volatile. This was not a frictionless partnership where we simply nodded and agreed to break the law for the sake of dramatic retribution. This was a severe, agonizing relationship cost. I was asking him to risk his career, and he was staring down the agonizing reality of refusing the woman he loved when she needed him the most. "I cannot do it, Emma." Ethan stated, his voice remarkably gentle but entirely firm. "My ethical obligations have not changed just because the timeline accelerated. If I use my firm's access to illegally secure that data, the evidence becomes tainted. A judge will throw it out, the venture capital firm will fire my partners, and I will be disbarred. We cannot fight fraud by committing a felony." His refusal was a harsh, necessary bucket of cold water. This was the absolute low point. I stood in the middle of the room facing the very real possibility that my restraint, my stubborn insistence on doing things the right way, was going to cost me the ultimate victory. I was staring down the barrel of a reality where my sister suffered zero consequences, and I remained the isolated, misunderstood villain of the family narrative. The temptation to panic, to grab for a fast illegal fix, and to become the exact, ruthless monster my parents always accused me of being was incredibly strong. I closed my eyes, the sound of the Seattle rain drumming a steady, chaotic beat against the penthouse windows. I remembered the little girl handing over her red bicycle to keep the peace. I remembered the exhausted professional deleting an angry text message to maintain her dignity. The entire trajectory of my life had been a fight against shrinking. If I panicked now, if I allowed vengeance to override my integrity, I was simply shrinking in a new, far more destructive way. I was letting their chaos dictate my character. I opened my eyes, the frantic energy slowly bleeding out of my muscles, replaced by a cold, crystalline resolve. I held my nerve. I realized that while the booking manager had deleted the localized scheduling files, he could not delete the one piece of evidence that existed entirely outside his corrupted system. He could not erase the digital audio file securely stored on my encrypted cloud drive. The recording of Harper cheerfully confessing to the $20,000 cash bribe remained pristine, untouchable, and lethal. "We do not need the manager's files," I announced, my voice dropping back into a calm, authoritative register. The realization sparked a brilliant, completely legitimate pivot in our strategy. And we do not need to prove Logan's larger corporate fraud ourselves. We do not need you to touch your client's servers, Ethan. Ethan raised an eyebrow, stepping closer, intrigued by the sudden shift in my demeanor. "How do we execute without the localized data?" I walked back to my desk, my fingers moving across the keyboard with renewed surgical precision. "We only need to make the initial bribe undeniable," I explained, opening a secure, anonymous communication portal. "We only need to light the match. If we provide irrefutable proof of a commercial bribe to the proper authorities, the subsequent investigation will automatically pry open Logan's financial records. We do not have to be the ones who find the embezzled funds. We just have to force the legitimate authorities to look." I attached the audio recording of Harper's confession to a formal, heavily documented complaint. I did not use my name or my corporate title. I utilized a secure, anonymous reporting mechanism to file the complaint directly with the State Commercial Fraud Division, citing specific violations of business statutes regarding illicit cash payments to secure commercial property. Simultaneously, I initiated a secondary internal protocol. I forwarded the exact same audio file directly to the Chief Compliance Officer of Summit Hospitality Holdings, bypassing the regional directors entirely. The compliance officer was legally obligated to investigate any credible report of employee bribery, ensuring the issue could not be quietly swept under the rug by panicked middle management. The disappearance of the booking manager would only serve to validate the recording, transforming his flight into an admission of guilt. By lawfully submitting the evidence to the appropriate state and corporate oversight bodies, I removed Ethan's conflict of interest entirely. The trap was successfully reset. It was cleaner, strictly legal, and no longer dependent on the presence of a terrified, fleeing employee. The venture capital firm would inevitably be notified of the state investigation into their prospective founder, triggering their own internal audits without Ethan ever crossing a single ethical line. I hit send on both encrypted transmissions, watching the progress bars flash green before disappearing into the digital ether. The heavy, suffocating anxiety that had gripped me moments earlier evaporated, replaced by the profound, steady satisfaction of a flawlessly executed, ethically sound maneuver. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, letting out a long, slow breath. "Okay," I said softly, looking at Ethan, a genuine, unburdened smile touching the corners of my mouth. "Now it is real." The tactical restructuring of our response had secured the legal framework, transforming the anxiety of Thursday evening into a quiet, focused anticipation by Saturday morning. The chaotic variables were locked down, leaving only the execution of the final decisive commands. The storm system that had battered Seattle for 3 days finally broke, leaving the morning air exceptionally crisp. Across the city, inside a sprawling, overpriced bridal suite at a luxury downtown hotel, Harper was holding court. I knew this because a prominent notification blinked on my tablet, indicating she had started a public live stream. She sat in a plush silk robe surrounded by fawning bridesmaids and an expensive glam squad holding her phone aloft to broadcast her radiant, borrowed confidence to thousands of followers. She smiled brightly into the camera lens, holding up a flute of imported champagne, performing the role of the triumphant, high society bride flawlessly. She spoke about the beautiful aesthetic of the Cascade Glass Conservatory, her voice dripping with artificial gratitude for the venue that had miraculously become available at the very last minute. She was reveling in her stolen victory, completely convinced that she had successfully orchestrated the ultimate social coup without a single consequence. I watched the live stream for a few seconds from the private stone terrace of the historic club where my actual ceremony was set to take place. The contrast between her frantic, performative broadcasting and the serene, grounded atmosphere surrounding me was striking. I was already dressed in my ivory silk gown. The intricate lace sleeves felt light against my skin. There were no flashing ring lights here, no social media followers to perform for. The people inside the club were genuine friends, loyal corporate colleagues, and Ethan's supportive family individuals who valued substance over spectacle. At exactly 8:55 in the morning, Ethan stepped onto the terrace. He wore a sharp, classic black tuxedo, his presence a steady, reassuring anchor. He walked up beside me, glancing briefly at the paused video of Harper on my tablet, before turning his attention to the magnificent snow-capped peak of Mount Rainier dominating the horizon. The mountain stood clear against the pale gray sky, a monument of quiet endurance. "It is time," Ethan said softly, his voice carrying the deep resonance of a man who understood the profound gravity of the moment. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over the keypad. The number for the regional director of Summit Hospitality Holdings was already pulled up on the screen. This was the moment I had planned for the exact sequence of events I had engineered to dismantle my family's toxic narrative. Yet as my thumb hovered over the green call button, I hesitated. The air felt suddenly very thin. This hesitation was not born of fear or second-guessing my legal authority. It was the heavy, mournful realization of the finality of this action. Pressing that button meant officially crossing the Rubicon. It meant actively initiating the sequence that would humiliate my sister and expose my parents' complicity to their elite social circle. A small, persistent echo of the 9-year-old girl who just wanted to keep the peace fluttered in my chest, whispering that I could still just let it go, that I could still just disappear and let them have their day. Ethan did not push me. He did not issue a command or try to manage my emotions. He simply stood beside me, offering silent, unwavering solidarity. He knew that if I made this call, it had to be my own deliberate choice, not a reaction forced by his litigator instincts. I looked at the phone, feeling the cool metal against my palm. I acknowledged the sadness, the genuine grief for a family dynamic that had always been fundamentally broken. But the grief was no longer strong enough to dictate my actions. I pressed the call button. The line rang twice before the regional director answered, his tone crisp and professional, clearly surprised to be receiving a direct call from the managing partner of the Blind Trust on a Saturday morning. "Good morning," I began, keeping my voice steady, stripped of any emotional inflection. "This is Emma Johnson, representing the holding company. I am calling to formally initiate a compliance protocol regarding a documented instance of commercial bribery at the Cascade Glass Conservatory." The director's professional tone shifted instantly to sharp defensive attention. I continued seamlessly outlining the exact nature of the fraud. I did not raise my voice or utilize aggressive adjectives. I deployed facts. I activated the audio file of Harper's phone call, allowing her gleeful confession regarding Logan's $20,000 cash expedition fee to play clearly over the secure connection. The undeniable proof of illicit activity echoed through the speaker, confirming the corruption of the booking manager. "The evidence is clear," I stated, the corporate executive taking absolute control of the conversation. "I am ordering the immediate compliance-mandated termination of the booking manager for cause. Furthermore, acting as the majority owner of the property, I am voiding the fraudulently obtained reservation for Logan Hayes and Harper Johnson under the strict anti-fraud clauses explicitly outlined in the venue's operational contracts." I paused, ensuring the regional director comprehended the absolute legal authority behind my directives. "The cancellation is effective immediately," I instructed. "Dispatch a professional facilities management team and our standard corporate security personnel to the conservatory right now. The instructions are singular. The venue is closed for cause. They are to secure the perimeter, admit 0 vendors, caterers, or guests associated with the voided event, and they are to deliver the formal printed notice of cancellation directly to the responsible party upon their arrival." The director quickly confirmed the orders, his voice tight with the urgency of executing a sudden high-level corporate mandate. The call disconnected with a soft electronic chime. I lowered the phone and set it gently onto the cedar side table next to the framed architectural rendering of the conservatory. I did not smile. There was no triumphant fist pump or surge of vindictive adrenaline. I looked down at my hands, feeling a profound, quiet exhaustion wash over me. The mechanism had been activated. The trap had sprung. It was family, however toxic and manipulative, and I took absolutely no joy in engineering their downfall. The victory felt solemn, a necessary surgical amputation, rather than a joyous celebration. Ethan reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and incredibly grounding. "You did it clean," he said softly, his dark eyes meeting mine with profound respect. "You did it right." His words highlighted the crucial distinction that separated me from the people I had just dismantled. I had not resorted to illegal back-channel sabotage or emotional screaming matches. I had not become the vindictive, unstable villain they always accused me of being. I had simply enforced boundaries using the legitimate, unassailable power I rightfully possessed. I had finally definitively stopped disappearing. I turned away from the phone and the framed rendering, severing my connection to the chaos unfolding across the city. The sun broke fully through the Seattle clouds, casting a brilliant warm glow across the stone terrace and illuminating the majestic face of Mount Rainier. I took a deep, fortifying breath, the crisp morning air filling my lungs with a sudden, overwhelming sense of freedom. The gun had been fired. The heavy machinery of consequences was now moving entirely on its own momentum. I squeezed Ethan's hand, a genuine, unburdened smile, finally touching the corners of my mouth. I stepped back inside, moving toward the music, the laughter, and the room full of people who actually loved me, ready to begin the rest of my life. While I stood in the sunlight on the terrace of the historic club, breathing in the quiet joy of my impending ceremony, a very different atmosphere was rapidly materializing across the city at the Cascade Glass Conservatory. The imposing architectural masterpiece, known for its soaring glass panels and lush botanical displays, was usually a hub of frantic, elegant activity on a Saturday morning. Florists would be rushing to arrange towering centerpieces. Caterers would be setting up chafing dishes, and the event coordinators would be buzzing with coordinated energy. Today, however, the venue projected an aura of stark, uncompromising silence. Harper's extravagant convoy, a fleet of sleek black luxury SUVs, and a stretched white limousine pulled up the long, curving driveway. Harper sat in the back of the lead vehicle, draped in a massive custom-designed gown that consumed most of the leather seating. She had spent the last 2 hours curating her social media presence, projecting the image of a radiant high society bride stepping graciously into a venue she had supposedly salvaged from her sister's financial ruin. She expected the heavy brass handles of the conservatory's main entrance to be polished and ready. She expected the doors to be thrown wide open, welcoming her into the opulent space she had stolen. Instead, as the limousine rolled to a smooth halt near the grand staircase, the reality of the situation presented a jarring, confusing tableau. The massive glass doors were not open. They were shut tight, and a thick, heavy steel chain was wrapped securely through the brass handles, fastened with a heavy-duty industrial padlock. The interior of the conservatory, usually blazing with warm, golden light to prepare for arriving guests, was entirely dark. There were no delivery trucks parked in the loading bay. There was no sign of the expensive caterers Logan had hired, nor the elaborate floral arches Harper had proudly boasted about on her live stream. The only people present were a highly organized, stoic team of private corporate security contractors standing at the base of the stairs, flanked by 2 members of the property's facilities management staff. They did not look welcoming. They projected the rigid, unyielding posture of personnel executing a strict corporate mandate. Harper stepped out of the limousine, the heavy train of her gown dragging slightly on the damp pavement. She looked at the dark building, then at the chain doors, a ripple of genuine confusion fracturing her carefully constructed, confident facade. She turned to the lead security supervisor, a tall man holding a clipboard and a bright yellow legal document. "What is going on here?" Harper demanded, her voice sharp with sudden escalating irritation. "Where is the event staff? Why are the doors locked? My vendors are supposed to be setting up the champagne tower right now. Open this building immediately. I am the bride. The security supervisor did not flinch. He did not offer a polite apology or attempt to placate her mounting frustration. He stepped forward, maintaining a professional, impassive distance, and extended the bright yellow document toward her. "Ma'am," the supervisor stated, his voice a flat, bureaucratic monotone that offered absolutely zero room for negotiation. "This property is officially closed for cause. I have been instructed to inform you that your reservation is completely void." Harper stared at the yellow paper, her brain struggling to process the impossible information. She snatched the document from his hand, her manicured nails digging into the crisp paper. "Void," she shrieked, the irritation instantly mutating into explosive, unhinged fury. "What do you mean, void? I have a signed contract." Logan paid the deposit. "We paid the booking manager directly. You cannot just lock me out of my own wedding venue. Do you have any idea who my fiancé is?" The supervisor clasped his hands behind his back, entirely unmoved by her theatrical outrage. "The booking manager you referenced has been terminated for cause this morning, effective immediately," the supervisor explained calmly. "Your reservation was obtained through documented commercial bribery. An illicit cash payment was made to an employee to induce a fraudulent contract. The managing director of the holding company that owns this property has formally voided the agreement under the anti-fraud clauses of our operational charter. The matter has been referred to the authorities. You must vacate the premises." Harper's jaw dropped. The words commercial bribery and fraud hung in the chilly Seattle air, heavy and terrifying. The performative rage she usually wielded to bully service workers suddenly faltered. She looked down at the bright yellow notice in her trembling hands. The document clearly stated the eviction citing severe contractual violations, and it bore the imposing official signature of the managing director of Summit Hospitality Holdings. "This is a mistake. It is a massive, stupid mistake," Harper stammered, the realization of her impending social annihilation finally piercing through her arrogance. The color drained rapidly from her face, leaving her pale and breathless. "My guests are arriving in 45 minutes. Logan's investors are on their way right now. 200 people are coming here. You cannot do this. I paid for this space." The supervisor did not offer a comforting platitude. "You paid a terminated employee an illegal bribe, ma'am," he corrected, highlighting the brutal reality of her situation. "You have no legal standing here. Please return to your vehicle." As the catastrophic reality crashed down upon her, Logan's sleek sports car skidded into the driveway, pulling up aggressively behind the limousine. Logan practically threw himself out of the driver's seat, sprinting toward the grand staircase. He was sweating profusely, his custom tuxedo looking rumpled and unkempt. He held his smartphone tightly against his ear, his face contorted in sheer, desperate panic. "Pick up, pick up, pick up!" Logan muttered frantically, dialing the corrupt booking manager's number for the 20th time. The call went straight to a generic voicemail box. The man who had gladly accepted his $20,000 cash bribe was gone. His phone disconnected, leaving Logan entirely exposed and completely stranded. Logan reached the stairs, taking in the chained doors and the unyielding security team. He looked at Harper, who was now shivering in her massive gown, the first tears of genuine, uncontrollable panic spilling over her eyelashes. The stolen fairy tale was collapsing in real time, brick by brick, right in front of their eyes. "What happened?" Logan demanded, his voice cracking as he grabbed Harper's arm. "Where is the manager? Where is the caterer?" "They locked us out." "Logan," Harper wailed, thrusting the yellow eviction notice against his chest. "They said you bribed someone. They said the contract is void. Logan, your investors are going to be here in less than an hour. What are we going to do? Where are we going to put them?" Logan stared at the yellow paper, his eyes widening as he read the words, commercial fraud. The arrogant tech entrepreneur, the man who believed his fabricated wealth made him invincible, suddenly looked like a terrified, trapped animal. He had built his entire persona on projecting absolute success, and now he was standing on a wet sidewalk, locked out of a venue he tried to steal, facing the imminent arrival of the very venture capitalists he desperately needed to impress. There was no backup plan. There was no hidden reserve of funds to quickly rent another space. He was completely out of options. A sleek luxury sedan pulled up to the curb, joining the chaotic, frantic scene. My parents Cynthia and Thomas stepped out of the vehicle. They had arrived expecting to be ushered into a luxurious VIP suite to sip champagne and bask in the reflected glory of their golden child's high society event. Instead, they walked into an absolute nightmare. Cynthia took one look at Harper's tear-stained face and the heavy steel chains on the glass doors, and she immediately went into a state of aggressive denial. She marched straight up to the security supervisor, her face flushed with indignant, misplaced authority. "This is an outrage," Cynthia shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the stoic guard. "My daughter is getting married here today. We are prominent members of this community. I demand you open those doors right this instant, or I will personally ensure the owner of this building is sued for every single penny they possess. I want to know exactly who authorized this ridiculous lockout, who dared to do this to my family." The sheer, staggering, dramatic irony of the moment was palpable. Cynthia and Thomas were standing on the cold concrete pavement, furiously threatening to sue the holding company, completely oblivious to the fact that they were throwing a tantrum on commercial property owned exclusively by the daughter they had told to shrink, accommodate, and disappear just 3 days prior. I was not there to gloat over them. I was not standing on the stairs, delivering a monologue to rub their faces in their humiliation. The retribution was being delivered entirely by consequence, a direct result of their own fraudulent choices. Thomas, watching his wife's hysterical demands fail to move the security team, realized that screaming at contractors would not magically unlock the doors. The panic settling over him was different from Logan's. It was the sheer terror of a man watching his social standing evaporate. The elite country club friends he had invited, the people he desperately wanted to impress with Logan's supposed wealth, were currently navigating Seattle traffic, heading straight toward this locked, empty building. Thomas needed a miracle. He needed someone capable of navigating impossible logistical nightmares, someone who always cleaned up the family's messes without asking for credit. In a moment of pure blind desperation, Thomas's brain bypassed the reality of his own recent cruelty. He completely forgot that he had aggressively ordered me to move my wedding to a cheap park. He forgot that he had essentially disowned me for daring to hold my ground. He reverted to the oldest, most reliable pattern he knew. Thomas pulled his cell phone from his tailored suit pocket. His hands were shaking violently as he scrolled through his contacts, desperately searching for the one person he believed could use their professional event planning connections to magically salvage the situation. Across the city, standing in the quiet sunlit hallway outside the historic club's library, I adjusted the delicate lace train of my gown. The string quartet had just begun playing the soft, elegant prelude music. I was moments away from stepping through the double doors to walk down the aisle. My phone, resting quietly in the pocket of my bridal assistant's apron nearby, suddenly illuminated. The screen flashed brightly, vibrating with an incoming call. The name displayed on the glowing screen was Thomas. The vibration of the phone was a persistent, frantic buzz, cutting through the serene, elegant atmosphere of the hallway. The bridal assistant looked at the glowing screen, her expression turning apologetic as she read the caller ID, then back to me, knowing I was seconds away from walking down the aisle. I raised my hand, offering a calm, reassuring nod. I stepped back from the threshold of the historic library, the soft prelude music continuing to play on the other side of the heavy wooden doors. I took the phone from her apron pocket, watching the name Thomas flash across the screen. I let it ring 3 times, allowing the silence in the hallway to center me. I knew exactly why he was calling. He was not calling to apologize for ordering me to a public park 3 days ago. He was not calling because he suddenly recognized my professional authority or believed I possessed some hidden, immense power. He was calling because the carefully curated illusion of his golden child's wedding was imploding on a rain-slicked sidewalk, and the panic had overridden his pride. In a moment of sheer desperation, his brain had instinctively bypassed the reality of his own cruelty and reverted to a decades-old pattern. He was reaching for the daughter who had spent her entire childhood fixing problems by absorbing the damage, the daughter who had always made herself small to ensure the rest of the family appeared flawless. He wanted me to sacrifice my dignity one final time to utilize my modest event planning contacts and miraculously salvage Harper's stolen day. I pressed the green button and raised the phone to my ear, answering on the fourth ring. "Emma, you have to help us," Thomas demanded, his voice cracking, violently stripped of its usual booming authoritarian resonance. It was the ragged, breathless sound of a man watching his social standing circle the drain. The venue locked us out. The owner voided everything. The security guards are refusing to let anyone inside, and Logan's investors are arriving in less than 30 minutes. You need to call whoever you know in the hospitality business. Pull some strings, Emma. Fix this right now. I stood in the quiet hallway, the intricate lace of my wedding gown brushing softly against the rich carpet. I did not feel the familiar crushing weight of daughterly obligation. I did not feel the urgent, terrified need to comply, to scramble, and to make myself useful to earn his love. The phantom pressure that had dictated my responses for 33 years simply did not exist anymore. I did not scream at him. I did not raise my voice or unleash a triumphant, vindictive monologue about revenge. I spoke quietly, almost gently, my tone reflecting the profound, unshakable peace I finally possessed. "I already know about the cancellation, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady and clear, "because I am the one who authorized it." The line went dead silent. For 5 agonizing seconds, the only sound transmitting through the speaker was the heavy, chaotic noise of the Seattle traffic and the distant sound of Harper's hysterical weeping in the background. Thomas was physically incapable of formulating a response. The words I had just spoken simply did not fit into the architecture of his reality. "What do you mean you authorized it?" Thomas finally rasped the confusion heavily, outweighing the panic, his mind stubbornly refusing to grasp the concept of his invisible daughter holding structural power over his life. "You do not have the authority to cancel a commercial contract, Emma. This is not a game. It is not a game, Dad." I agreed softly, looking out the tall window at the brilliant sunlight hitting the peak of Mount Rainier. My private equity firm owns the hospitality group that operates the Cascade Glass Conservatory. Through an irrevocable blind trust, I am the managing partner and the majority owner of the very building Harper is currently standing outside of. Another stifling silence stretched across the connection. I could hear the gears grinding in his head as the massive, impossible truth began to slowly dismantle his perception of the world. "You did not steal a venue from a helpless sister." I continued my words, carrying the calm, undeniable weight of consequence rather than the sharp edge of vengeance. Logan paid a $20,000 cash bribe to my employee to induce a fraudulent contract on my commercial property. I did not punish anyone today, Dad. I just stopped covering for you. That single sentence, "I just stopped covering for you," was the culmination of my entire existence. It was the final, definitive severing of the toxic cord that had bound me to their dysfunction. For years, I had quietly absorbed their insults, minimized my achievements, and hidden my wealth to protect their fragile egos. I had allowed them to believe they were the successful ones, shielding them from the reality of their own incompetence. But today, I simply stepped out of the way and allowed gravity to do its work. "I cannot fix this." I added my tone, devoid of cruelty, offering only the stark, unavoidable truth. "And I will not fix it. The authorities are already involved because the commercial fraud Logan committed was real. I did not manufacture this crisis. I did not will this harm upon you. I simply enforced the law on a property I own. You have to handle the consequences of your own choices now." On the other end of the line, I heard Cynthia's shrill, panicked voice cut through the background noise. "Thomas, who are you talking to?" she demanded, her tone vibrating with frantic entitlement. "Tell me you reached someone who can get these chains off the doors. We have executives pulling into the driveway right now." Thomas did not answer her. He could not speak. The realization that the daughter he had continually ordered to disappear was the actual architect of the corporate structure towering over him had rendered him entirely mute. He was standing on a wet sidewalk surrounded by the elite society he worshipped, facing the absolute humiliating destruction of his family's reputation, and he finally understood that he had handed me the power to do it. I did not wait for him to find his voice. I did not need to hear his apologies or his inevitable desperate attempts to shift the blame. I had said everything that needed to be said. The transaction was complete. "I have to go, Dad," I said, my voice light and unburdened. "I am getting married." I moved the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button, cleanly severing the connection. I did not slam the phone down in anger. I just ended the call quietly and permanently ending my participation in their chaotic narrative. Back on the chaotic sidewalk outside the conservatory, the phone slipped from Thomas's trembling fingers, dropping heavily onto the wet pavement. The screen shattered against the concrete, a physical manifestation of his ruined reality. I handed the phone back to my bridal assistant, offering her a genuine, radiant smile. I turned away from the window, breathing in the crisp air of the historic hallway. I smoothed the silk of my gown one final time, feeling profoundly grounded. The frightened child who was told to give up her bicycle, the woman who was ordered to hide in a suburban park, had just refused to disappear. For the very first time in my life, I had spoken the truth out loud, and the sky had not fallen. I stepped toward the heavy wooden doors, ready to walk into a room filled with people who valued my presence, ready to step entirely into the light. While I stepped through the heavy wooden doors of the historic library, surrounded by the warmth of authentic friends and the resonant chords of a string quartet, the cold, unyielding machinery of federal justice was simultaneously arriving at the Cascade Glass Conservatory. This was not a theatrical, highly orchestrated takedown manipulated by Ethan or myself. We had deliberately stepped back, refusing to weaponize Ethan's confidential client access or resort to illegal back-channel sabotage. The trap closing around Logan was entirely a product of his own breathtaking arrogance, activated by the legitimate procedural momentum of the American legal system. The foundation for this exact moment had not been hastily manufactured in the frantic 72 hours since Harper stole my venue. The structural collapse had been quietly building for months. When I initially filed the anonymous, heavily documented complaint regarding the $20,000 cash bribe with the State Commercial Fraud Division, I simply lit a match. The state investigators, recognizing a clear violation of business statutes tied to a high-profile tech founder, automatically initiated a preliminary inquiry. Furthermore, the panicked booking manager's attempt to aggressively delete internal server logs had triggered an unavoidable mandatory compliance referral within the hospitality group's corporate governance structure. The sudden, frantic erasure of financial data is a massive red flag in any corporate audit, practically demanding external oversight. But the most devastating clean payoff originated from the very entity Ethan had refused to touch, the venture capital firm funding Logan's fraudulent startup. The investment firm did not require a tip-off from their outside counsel. In the highly networked, hyper-vigilant ecosystem of Seattle tech investments news of a portfolio founder being officially implicated in a state commercial bribery investigation travels with terrifying speed. When the state inquiry surfaced through standard public compliance checks earlier that week, the venture capital firm's internal risk management team immediately launched an aggressive, unannounced forensic audit of Logan's startup Apex Cloud Solutions. Operating entirely independent of my personal vendetta, their financial analysts quickly breached the superficial facade of Logan's company. They discovered exactly what my initial restricted search had suspected: the startup was a hollow shell. There were no proprietary software developments, no active engineering teams, and zero legitimate revenue streams. Logan had systematically embezzled millions of dollars in seed funding, siphoning the capital through a network of opaque holding accounts to finance his luxury vehicles, his extravagant lifestyle, and the hefty cash bribes required to maintain his illusion of elite status. The venture capital firm, realizing they had been massively defrauded, immediately bypassed civil litigation and handed their comprehensive audit directly over to federal authorities. The culmination of these separate, legitimate investigations converged on the wet sidewalk outside the chained doors of the conservatory, just as the first wave of elite wedding guests began to arrive. The atmosphere outside the venue was already a chaotic nightmare of logistical panic. Harper was sobbing hysterically, the hem of her expensive designer gown soaking up the dirty rain puddles forming on the concrete. Cynthia was shouting empty threats at the stoic private security guards while Thomas stood frozen, staring blankly at his shattered phone on the pavement. Logan was sweating through his custom tuxedo, frantically scrolling through his contacts, desperately searching for a lifeline that did not exist. He was pacing near the front bumper of his leased luxury limousine, preparing a fabricated story to appease the venture capitalists he saw pulling up in their black town cars. He never got the chance to deliver his pitch. The wail of approaching sirens did not announce their arrival. The takedown was executed with the chilling, understated efficiency characteristic of federal white-collar operations. 3 dark, unmarked sport utility vehicles and 2 standard police cruisers glided smoothly to the curb, physically blocking the exit path of Harper's limousine convoy. The doors opened in synchronized unison. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division stepped out onto the pavement, their dark windbreakers clearly identifying their authority. They did not rush the crowd with weapons drawn. They did not shout aggressive commands or create a cinematic theatrical spectacle. They moved with a terrifying procedural calm that instantly silenced the panicked shouting of my mother and the hysterical weeping of my sister. The agents bypassed Cynthia entirely. They did not even glance at Harper in her ruined wedding dress. Their focus was singular and absolute. The lead agent, a tall man with a remarkably impassive expression, walked directly up to Logan. The tech entrepreneur who had spent the last 2 years projecting an aura of untouchable Silicon Valley dominance physically shrank as the federal officer approached. His arrogant swagger evaporated instantly, replaced by the instinctual, visceral terror of a man who knows his entire fraudulent existence has just been exposed. Logan took a trembling half-step backward, raising his hands in a weak defensive gesture. "Wait!" Logan stammered, his voice cracking, shedding the polished baritone he used for investor pitches. "There is a misunderstanding here. I am hosting a private event. You have the wrong person." The lead agent did not engage in a debate. He did not slam Logan against the hood of the limousine or perform for the growing crowd of stunned onlookers. He simply reached out, grasped Logan firmly by the upper arm, and turned him around. Logan Hayes. The agent stated, his voice a steady, authoritative hum that carried clearly over the sound of the Seattle rain. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit money laundering." The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting securely around Logan's wrists echoed across the sidewalk. It was a precise, definitive sound that finalized the destruction of the golden illusion. Logan's knees buckled slightly, his tech bro armor completely dissolving into a pathetic, whimpering mess. The confident founder, who had casually bribed his way into my wedding venue, was now weeping openly, his chest heaving as the reality of a federal indictment crushed his lungs. "Harper, do something," Logan cried out, twisting his head to look at his bride. "Call the lawyers. Tell them it is a mistake." But Harper could not move. She stood paralyzed, her hands clamped over her mouth, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. She watched the man she had proudly flaunted as her billionaire ticket to elite society get searched and patted down by federal agents exactly like a common street criminal. The man she believed would elevate her far above my supposedly mediocre life was currently sobbing in front of the very people she had desperately tried to impress. The retribution playing out on the pavement was impeccably proportionate and inherently poetic. Logan was not being punished because I had executed an illegal, vindictive sabotage. He was being undone by the exact fraud he had so arrogantly built, exposed by the very investors he had defrauded, and arrested by the legitimate authorities he thought he could outsmart. I had not engineered his fall. I had simply stopped being the soft, compliant cushion that always absorbed the impact of my family's terrible choices. I had let gravity take over, and gravity was currently dragging him toward the back of a federal vehicle. The timing of the arrest ensured maximum social devastation. The elite tech investors, the local influencers, and my parents' snobbish country club acquaintances had stepped out of their arriving vehicles only to walk directly into an active federal crime scene. The guests stood huddled under their umbrellas, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock and finally to distinct, undeniable revulsion. They were not witnessing a glamorous high society wedding. They were witnessing a perp walk. The agents firmly guided the weeping groom toward the open door of the dark sport utility vehicle, gently but forcefully pushing him into the back seat. The door slammed shut, sealing away the arrogant facade forever. The vehicles pulled away from the curb, merging into the downtown traffic, leaving an echoing silence in their wake. Harper was left entirely alone on the wet sidewalk. The rain continued to fall, soaking the heavy layers of her designer gown, matting her perfectly styled hair against her pale face. Her parents, frozen in shock near the chained doors of the conservatory, offered no comfort. The venture capitalists and the elite guests, the very audience she had stolen my venue to perform for, were already pulling out their cell phones. Screens glowed in the gray morning light as the attendees began recording the shattered bride, capturing her absolute devastating humiliation to share with the world. She had demanded the spotlight, and now she was trapped squarely within its harsh, unforgiving glare. While Harper stood shivering on the damp pavement, surrounded by the glow of recording smartphones, I sat in a quiet, sunlit antechamber just off the main library of the historic club. The string quartet had transitioned to a vibrant, joyful movement, the melody drifting softly through the heavy oak doors. I held my phone in my lap, feeling the smooth, cold glass against my palm. The notifications from my security team, confirming the peaceful execution of the venue lockout, had subsided, replaced by a single highly urgent text message from the senior legal counsel at my private equity firm. The message contained a preliminary analysis of the federal indictments now actively leveling Logan's fraudulent startup. As my legal team reviewed the unsealed corporate filings to assess any residual liability to our hospitality group, they uncovered a staggering, catastrophic detail regarding the initial seed funding. The massive commercial loans Logan had secured to launch Apex Cloud Solutions required a secondary personal guarantor. I stared at the glowing screen, my eyes locking onto the name documented on the loan agreements. It was Thomas. My father had not merely offered emotional support to his golden child's fiancée. He had blindly co-signed the exorbitant financial loans, officially tethering his entire personal net worth to a federal money laundering scheme. The implications were devastating. With Logan now in federal custody and the venture capital firm demanding immediate restitution, the banks would inevitably call in the debts. They would target the secondary guarantor to recover the missing millions. This exposure meant my parents were facing total, undeniable bankruptcy. The collapse of Logan's empire would trigger the immediate foreclosure of their pristine suburban home, the liquidation of their retirement accounts, and the absolute destruction of their country club status. But the text message from my corporate counsel presented a specific, immediate tactical decision. As the majority owner of the venue that had been defrauded through commercial bribery, my holding company possessed the legal right to file a massive civil suit for damages against Logan and, by extension, his guarantors. My counsel explicitly noted that if we pressed these claims aggressively alongside the federal charges, we would accelerate my parents' financial ruin, ensuring they lost everything within a matter of weeks rather than months. The firm was awaiting my executive authorization to proceed. I was suddenly handed a genuine, profound choice. I held the power to guarantee their total annihilation. I could instruct my lawyers to ruthlessly pursue every available penalty, twisting the knife deep into the wounds my family had inflicted upon themselves. I could ensure that the people who had demanded I shrink my life to accommodate a narcissist were left with absolutely nothing but the clothes on their backs. Ethan stood near the large arched window, adjusting his cuffs. He caught my gaze, reading the sudden tension hardening my features. He walked over, his expression calm and incredibly grounded. He did not ask what the message said. He simply looked at the phone in my hand, understanding that a critical pivot point had arrived. He did not offer legal advice. He did not push me toward vengeance or preach forgiveness. He remained entirely silent, serving as the steady, unyielding mirror I needed to confront my own reflection. This decision belonged entirely to me. I looked down at the screen, the cursor blinking expectantly, waiting for my command. The old wound, the deep aching grievance of a child who was constantly told she was inadequate, screamed for annihilation. A part of me desperately wanted to hit send, to authorize the lawyers to unleash hell, to finally make them feel the crushing weight of the pain they had so casually dealt to me for 33 years. I wanted them to suffer the exact isolation and humiliation they had planned for my wedding day. But as my thumb hovered over the keyboard, the image of the 9-year-old girl in the driveway surfaced again. I remembered the red bicycle. I remembered the heavy, suffocating feeling of being labeled the difficult, vindictive sister simply because I existed. My family had spent my entire life trying to convince me and everyone else that I was a cold, calculating villain. If I chose to actively destroy them now, if I used my massive corporate power to deliberately crush them into poverty, I would finally prove their lie to be true. I would become the monster they had always accused me of being. The realization settled over me, profound and intensely clarifying. I did not want to be a monster. I did not want to carry the heavy, toxic burden of being their executioner. My victory did not require their total annihilation. My victory required my absolute freedom from their narrative. I looked at Ethan, the man who had insisted from the very beginning that we do this right, that we maintain our integrity in the face of their deceit. I took a deep, fortifying breath, letting the residual anger and the desire for vengeance slowly bleed out of my system. The tension in my shoulders finally dropped. I tapped the screen and began typing my response to the corporate counsel. I am not going to twist the knife. I typed, my fingers moving with steady, unburdened purpose. Do not press any civil claims or pursue damages against the guarantors. Withdraw our holding company from any aggressive litigation regarding the default. Let the federal authorities handle the criminal charges. The law can do what it does. I am done managing their lives, including their punishment. I hit send. The message vanished, officially closing the door on my participation in their downfall. This was the essence of sacred justice. I was granting them a mercy. I absolutely did not owe them a restraint chosen freely and deliberately. By declining to crush them, I exercised a power far greater than vengeance. I proved that I was entirely unbothered by their existence. I was no longer defined by their approval, their rejection, or even my immense power over them. Their destruction was not my trophy. My freedom was the victory. Ethan read the quiet shift in my demeanor, the sudden lightness that replaced the rigid defensive posture I had carried for weeks. He stepped closer, reaching out to gently cup my face. His dark eyes shone with an immense, fierce pride. "That is exactly why they were always wrong about you," Ethan said, his voice a low, rough whisper that carried the weight of absolute validation. For the first time since Harper had called to brag about stealing the venue, the ironclad control I had maintained finally cracked. A sudden, overwhelming surge of emotion rose in my chest. It was not the bitter sting of defeat or the harsh adrenaline of retaliation. It was the pure, unadulterated release of a burden I had carried for 3 decades. A few hot tears escaped, spilling over my eyelashes and tracking slowly down my cheeks. I did not try to wipe them away or hide my vulnerability. I let myself feel the genuine, unguarded emotion of a woman who had finally laid down her armor. I smiled, a real, radiant expression breaking through the tears. I took a deep breath, the air tasting impossibly sweet and clean. I reached down, picked up my phone, and powered the device down completely. I set it on the small wooden table in the antechamber, turning my back on the screen, the notifications, and the chaotic wreckage of the family I was leaving behind for good. The heavy oak doors leading into the main library swung open. The string quartet shifted seamlessly into the vibrant, soaring notes of my chosen processional. The sunlight streamed through the high arched windows, illuminating the faces of the 200 people waiting inside. They were smiling, their expressions filled with genuine joy and authentic support. I reached out and took the arm of my senior mentor, the man who had valued my intellect and encouraged my strength when my blood relatives had only demanded my silence. He smiled at me, a proud, steadying presence. I looked toward the altar where Ethan stood waiting, offering a partnership built on absolute trust and unwavering respect. The child who had been conditioned to disappear was gone. The woman who remained stepped fully into the light, unburdened, unapologetic, and finally ready to walk down the aisle exactly as herself. The transition from the cold, rain-swept pavement outside the chained conservatory to the interior of the historic club library was a masterclass in atmospheric contrast. The air in the library was not thick with panic or the harsh glare of flashing police lights. Instead, it was infused with an incredible, encompassing warmth. The high vaulted ceilings of the room were constructed from rich, dark mahogany, a striking juxtaposition to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that dominated the far wall. Those windows perfectly framed the snow-capped peak of Mount Rainier, the natural light pouring into the room, illuminating the space with a brilliant golden clarity that rendered the artificial opulence of the glass conservatory completely irrelevant. This was not a backup venue hurriedly booked to salvage a ruined weekend. This was a deliberate, deeply intentional choice. The library was a space defined by history, intellect, and quiet endurance. It was a place that mirrored the strength I had fought so desperately to build within myself, quietly outshining the fragile, performative luxury my sister had tried to steal. I had chosen this room because it resonated with authenticity, rather than serving as a transparent flex of my private equity wealth. As the string quartet shifted into the soaring, triumphant notes of the processional, I stepped fully through the heavy oak doors. I did not walk down the aisle alone, bearing the stigma of an abandoned daughter. I was escorted by Arthur, the senior managing partner at the firm where I began my career in commercial real estate. Arthur was a man of exacting standards and quiet brilliance, a mentor who had recognized my analytical mind early on. When my biological parents had demanded I shrink my ambitions and prioritize my sister's ego, Arthur had challenged me to dominate boardroom negotiations and trust my own formidable intellect. Having him by my side today was a profound statement. He represented the validation I had earned through merit, a stark contrast to the conditional, manipulative affection I had left behind. We moved slowly down the wide, pristine aisle. The faces turning toward me were not those of judgmental relatives waiting for me to falter, nor were they the snooty, superficial country club acquaintances my parents usually corralled for their social events. The 200 guests seated in the library formed a genuine, unshakable, chosen family. There were brilliant corporate attorneys from Ethan's firm, fiercely loyal colleagues from my private equity ventures, and close friends who had stood by us through grueling professional milestones and personal hardships. There was absolutely no performance of wealth occurring in this room. No one was subtly checking the brand of the floral arrangements or whispering about the cost of the catering. There were no smartphones raised high in the air, eagerly recording a public humiliation for social media clout. The audience was fully present, their eyes shining with authentic joy and profound respect as they watched me walk toward the altar. The atmosphere was free of the suffocating, competitive toxicity that usually poisoned my family gatherings. It was pure, unadulterated celebration, a reward I had secured through immense restraint and unimaginable patience. I reached the front of the room, and Arthur offered a warm, proud smile before placing my hand gently into Ethan's awaiting palm. Ethan's grip was solid, an anchor of absolute security. His dark eyes reflected the sunlight streaming through the massive windows, and the look of fierce, protective devotion on his face was staggering. We turned to face the officiant, the gentle hum of the string quartet fading into a respectful, expectant silence. The ceremony proceeded with a beautiful, unhurried grace. The words spoken were not generic platitudes about enduring hardship or compromising oneself for the sake of peace. They were highly specific, honoring the rigorous partnership we had built. A partnership rooted in transparency, intellectual equality, and the mutual refusal to settle for a mediocre existence. The pacing of the moment felt incredibly luxurious, a deep restorative breath taken after navigating a gauntlet of federal indictments and bitter betrayals. When it came time for our vows, Ethan took both of my hands in his. He did not perform for the audience. He spoke directly to me, his voice a low, steady resonance that anchored me entirely to the present. He promised to continually challenge me to respect the boundaries we established and to fiercely protect the sanctuary of our home. Then, just before slipping the heavy platinum band onto my finger, he paused. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, a private, intimate acknowledgement passing between us. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so the words were meant only for my ears, a direct reference to the agonizing ethical battle we had waged in our home office days prior. "You did it, Emma," Ethan murmured, his tone thick with profound admiration. "You navigated the storm, and you did it without ever becoming someone you would have to apologize to." A surprised, watery laugh escaped my lips. The tension I had unknowingly been holding in my jaw finally released completely. The tears that welled in my eyes were not the residual sting of a childhood wound. They were tears of profound, earned catharsis. I had survived the ultimate test of my character. I had held the power to obliterate the people who hurt me, and I had chosen the harder, far more honorable path of restraint. I smiled up at the man who had held the mirror for me, slipping my own ring onto his finger, sealing a pact built on unshakable integrity. As the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, the library erupted into genuine, thunderous applause. Ethan pulled me into a deep, lingering kiss, the sheer elation of the moment washing over me in a brilliant wave. We turned to face our guests, the joy in the room palpable and totally uncomplicated by cruelty or underlying agendas. While the guests began to stand, preparing to transition to the reception area, my gaze swept briefly over the back rows of the library. During the intense logistical restructuring of the guest list, I had insisted on keeping one specific chair empty near the rear doors. It was a quiet, private concession, reserved just in case the smear campaign failed to permanently sever every tie. My eyes found the empty chair, and my breath hitched slightly. The chair was no longer empty. Standing quietly behind it was Eleanor, my former university mentor, the woman whose disappointed message had cut me so deeply just days ago. She was wearing a simple, elegant suit, her posture respectful and subdued. She did not approach the aisle or attempt to cause a distraction. She simply stood at the back of the room, her eyes meeting mine across the sea of celebrating guests. It was clear she had learned the truth. The rapid, spectacular collapse of Logan's fraudulent startup and the highly publicized federal arrests outside the conservatory had undoubtedly shattered Harper's manufactured narrative. Eleanor had seen through the lies, realizing the immense restraint I had exercised while being publicly vilified. She offered me a small, deeply apologetic nod, a silent acknowledgement of her misjudgment, and a quiet plea for eventual reconciliation. I did not glare at her or turn away in spite. Not every bridge had to be burned to the ground. Some relationships built on a foundation of genuine prior respect could survive the harsh impact of honesty. I offered her a slight gracious nod in return, accepting the unspoken apology without letting it disrupt the perfection of my day. The reception that followed was a masterpiece of relaxed elegance. Waiters circulated with trays of vintage champagne, the crisp, expensive bubbles perfectly complementing the atmosphere of total victory. There were no tense whispers, no performative toasts, masking deep-seated resentments. The laughter was loud, authentic, and completely unburdened. As the evening progressed, Ethan and I stepped onto the polished wooden dance floor for our first dance. The lights in the library dimmed slightly, allowing the twilight glow of the Seattle skyline to reflect against the massive windows. Ethan pulled me close, his hand resting securely on the small of my back as we moved smoothly to the music. I rested my head against his shoulder, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the sheer, unadulterated happiness of the day settle into my bones. The frantic, desperate need to prove my worth was entirely gone, replaced by the quiet, intoxicating thrill of total freedom. I opened my eyes, looking past Ethan's shoulder toward the towering windows. The camera seemed to pull back slowly, moving through the expansive glass, framing us perfectly against the darkening silhouette of Mount Rainier. It was the exact same view from the private terrace where the morning began, the same mountain that had witnessed my quiet, heartbreaking order to initiate the venue lockout. But the context had completely transformed. The view no longer held the cold, sad weight of a necessary amputation. It now held the radiant, undeniable celebration of a woman who had finally unequivocally stopped disappearing. 8 months have passed since the rain cleared over the historic library, and the seasons in Seattle have shifted into a brilliant, crisp autumn. The frantic, high-stakes tension that once dictated my every waking moment has dissolved, replaced by a steady, enduring peace. The legal and financial machinery, driven entirely by the systems I chose to trust rather than my own personal vengeance, has methodically run its natural course. The conclusion of Logan's saga was devoid of any theatrical courtroom monologues or sensationalized media circuses. He faced sentencing on a quiet Tuesday morning. I did not attend the hearing. I simply read the sterile, objective summary provided by Ethan's colleagues over a cup of morning coffee. The federal judge handed down a proportionate, highly devastating sentence based solely on the documented evidence of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The poetic justice of his downfall lay in the fact that the very venture capitalists he had invited to the conservatory, the elite investors he had desperately sought to dazzle with a stolen venue, were the primary architects of his ruin. They took the witness stand and laid bare the hollow, fraudulent shell of his startup. Logan received an 8-year mandatory minimum sentence in a federal correctional facility. The tech entrepreneur armor he wore so proudly dissolved into the reality of a standard-issue prison uniform. He was undone by the exact illusion he had dedicated his life to maintaining. The punishment met the crime with bureaucratic precision. The ripple effect on my sister required no intervention from my firm. Stripped of the fabricated wealth she had anchored her entire identity to Harper, was forced to face a stark, unforgiving reality. Without Logan's stolen seed money to fund her designer wardrobe, and with our parents drowning in their own immediate crisis, her curated social media lifestyle evaporated into thin air. Her wealthy friends, recognizing the toxic taint of a federal fraud scandal, quietly excluded her from their elite circles. A few weeks ago, while walking through a mid-tier retail district to meet a prospective client, I caught a brief glimpse of her through a storefront window. She was working as a floor associate at a standard, unassuming clothing boutique. She wore a plain black uniform, her posture lacking the haughty entitlement that used to define her every movement. She was meticulously organizing a rack of knit sweaters, looking humbled and profoundly tired. I did not stop. I did not walk inside the store to offer a patronizing smile or a mocking comment. I did not feel the urge to rescue her from her new reality. I simply kept walking down the pavement. The story extended her neither mockery nor salvation. Her fate was living the mundane, ordinary existence she had spent 30 years looking down upon. It was a quiet, sobering reality, and it belonged entirely to her. The financial fallout for Cynthia and Thomas was equally precise, dictated by their own signatures rather than my power. Because they had eagerly co-signed Logan's commercial loans, dazzled by the promise of elevating their social standing through his success, they were left exposed when his startup collapsed. However, because I had specifically directed my corporate counsel to waive any civil claims from our hospitality group regarding the venue theft, my parents were spared total annihilation. They did not face exorbitant damages for the commercial bribery or the lockout. The law simply ran its proportional course. The banks initiated proceedings to recover the defaulted venture capital loans. To satisfy the crushing debt, my parents were forced to sell their pristine suburban estate and surrender the exclusive country club memberships they prized above all else. They downsized into a modest, unremarkable townhome on the far outskirts of the city. They were not left destitute on the street, but they permanently lost the affluent facade that had governed their every decision and fueled their superiority complex. They faced the exact consequences of their own choices, scaled perfectly to their own risks. The retribution was just balanced and remarkably poetic. The ultimate test of this newfound equilibrium arrived on a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was sitting in my penthouse office, the gray waters of Puget Sound stretching out beneath my window. My phone illuminated on the glass desk, signaling a new voicemail. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. It was the ghost of the old dynamic reaching out to see if the strings were still attached. I tapped the screen and pressed play, letting the audio fill the sunlit room. "Emma, it is your mother." The voice began sounding hesitant, but layered with the familiar calculating cadence of a guilt trip. "It has been a very difficult season for us. The move to the new house has been exhausting, and your sister is struggling so much to find her footing. I hope you are satisfied with how everything turned out, but despite all this pain, we are still family. You should call your father. His heart is broken, and we really need to heal this divide." It was a masterful performance, a seamless blend of a half apology and a barbed accusation. She was testing the waters, deploying the old script to see if it still worked. She wanted me to rush back into my designated role as the family fixer to absorb their discomfort, apologize for their misery, and smooth over the rough edges of their consequences. I sat in my ergonomic chair, listening to every single word of the message. For the first time in my life, my pulse did not quicken. My chest did not tighten with the familiar suffocating urge to please them or defend myself. The words sounded incredibly hollow, a faint echo from a universe I no longer inhabited. The terrified child who would have scrambled to fix the situation was gone, replaced by a woman who recognized the manipulation for exactly what it was. I did not draft a lengthy text message outlining their hypocrisies. I did not call her back to deliver a self-righteous lecture on boundaries and respect. I simply reached out, tapped the screen, and deleted the voicemail. I deleted it without a single ounce of spite, but rather because I no longer needed anything from them. I did not even need the last word. The profound absence of drama was the true resolution. I severed the final thread in total silence, denying the toxic cycle the oxygen it needed to survive. I turned my attention back to my laptop, reviewing the quarterly numbers for my private equity firm. The metrics are exceptional. The commercial real estate portfolios are thriving, generating unprecedented yields, and the hospitality group has seen a surge in legitimate bookings. But the financial success displayed on the glowing monitor is merely a backdrop. It is a testament to my competence, but it is not the trophy I value most. I close the laptop, the soft click resonating in the quiet office. I lean back in my chair and look out the window at the distant snow-capped peak of the mountain. The real trophy is not the money, the penthouses, or the corporate titles. The real trophy is the profound, unbroken silence in my chest, residing exactly in the space where the old, agonizing anxiety used to live. The evening sun casts long, golden streaks across the wide, hardwood floors of our penthouse. I stand near the floor-to-ceiling windows, holding a warm cup of herbal tea, watching the ferries carve gentle white wakes into the deep blue expanse of Puget Sound. This space is no longer a heavily guarded secret kept hidden away to protect my family's fragile egos. It is simply my home. The decoy apartment was surrendered months ago, the lease quietly terminated. I do not have to compartmentalize my existence or mute my surroundings to make other people comfortable. I exist fully in the daylight, surrounded by the art, the furniture, and the life Ethan and I chose to build together. The air up here feels incredibly clear, untainted by the claustrophobic expectations that used to dictate my every decision. Behind me, the soft, rhythmic hum of the espresso machine signals Ethan's presence in the kitchen. He is wearing a comfortable gray sweater, his tie discarded hours ago, reviewing a legal brief while checking his phone. The device chimes with a continuous, cheerful cadence. Our group chat, filled with the colleagues, mentors, and genuine friends who celebrated our authentic wedding, is active with dinner plans for the upcoming weekend. There is no anxiety attached to these notifications, no underlying dread of a manufactured crisis or a sudden demand for a financial bailout. It is just the effortless flow of a chosen family communicating with ease and mutual respect. The contrast between this effortless warmth and the frantic manipulative demands of my past is a profound daily comfort. I take a sip of the tea, letting the soothing warmth settle into my chest. Looking out at the Seattle skyline, I reflect on the profound shift that has taken place over the last year. The overarching narrative of my life used to be defined by a bitter, silent conquest, a desperate need to accumulate enough leverage to insulate myself from my biological relatives. But the ultimate resolution was never about acquiring wealth or wielding corporate dominance. I already possessed the capital. I already held the executive titles and the sprawling real estate portfolios long before my sister attempted to steal my venue. What actually changed was my internal landscape. I finally stopped auditioning for the love of people who were deeply committed to seeing me as small. I dismantled the ingrained belief that my worth required my disappearance. For 33 years, I had operated under the assumption that if I just remained quiet enough, generous enough, and invisible enough, I would eventually earn my parents' affection. I thought that by minimizing my footprint, I could somehow balance the uneven scales of our household. I surrendered that illusion entirely. Releasing that desperate hope was the hardest, most vital transaction I have ever executed. The realization that their approval was a currency, devoid of any real value, freed me from a lifelong, exhausting performance. That liberation extends to my professional assets as well. The Cascade Glass Conservatory, the very property that served as the battleground for my emancipation, has reopened under honest, highly competent management. I did not sell the building, nor did I turn it into a sterile monument commemorating my family's downfall. I treated it with the exact same objective clarity I apply to all my investments. It is a thriving, profitable event space that hosts beautiful, legitimate celebrations for people who value its unique architecture. I never leverage the venue to intimidate competitors or punish adversaries. The property was cleansed of the deceit that once tainted its doors, restored to its proper function within my private equity portfolio. The dramatic lockout on that rainy Saturday morning is a closed chapter, a singular necessary enforcement of the law that I never need to repeat. It stands as a functioning business, a testament to forward momentum rather than a shrine to past grievances. I turn away from the window and walk toward the sleek cedar side table, resting near the edge of the living room. Sitting perfectly centered on the wood is the framed architectural rendering of the glass conservatory. I reach out, allowing my thumb to rest gently against the cool surface of the frame, tracing the soaring glass arches depicted in the illustration. Months ago, standing on the terrace of the historic club, this exact gesture was laden with a heavy, suffocating grief. It was the physical manifestation of mourning a family I realized I would never truly have. Today, my thumb traces the glass, and I feel no sorrow. The lingering ache is entirely gone, replaced by a quiet, grounded ownership of my own story. I do not look at the rendering and see a stolen wedding or a bitter sibling rivalry. I see a beautiful structure that belongs to me, a visual representation of the life I built with my own hands, protected by my own boundaries. The glass feels smooth and reassuring beneath my touch, a tactile reminder of the peace I have fought so relentlessly to secure. The truth of navigating a toxic family dynamic is rarely portrayed with accuracy. Society pushes a persistent, damaging narrative that shared genetics require infinite forgiveness. We are told that drawing a line in the sand is an act of cruelty, that walking away makes us the villain. But blood does not obligate you to endure abuse. The goal of untangling yourself from a manipulative environment should never be to destroy the people who tried to make you disappear. The ultimate goal is simply to stop disappearing. Setting firm, unyielding boundaries is not an act of vengeance. It is the defining moment you stop volunteering to be the one who bleeds so everyone else can stay comfortable. My parents and my sister wanted me to remain in the shadows, functioning as a silent, reliable shock absorber for their endless mistakes. They relied on my compliance to sustain their fabricated realities and fund their illusions of grandeur. They expected me to shrink so they could feel immense. I did not burn their house down in response. I did not orchestrate a spiteful, illegal campaign to ruin their lives or humiliate them for sport. I just walked out of their shadows, stepped into the light, and locked the door behind me. I let their own choices determine their fate, refusing to intervene when the foundation they built on lies began to crumble. I realized that true power is not wielding a sledgehammer against your enemies. It is realizing you hold the deed to the ground they stand on and choosing to walk away. Because I was the one who owned the property all along. The narrative I constructed for myself is no longer a story of retaliation. It is a story of profound, unshakable emancipation. The energy I used to spend anticipating their next emotional ambush is now directed toward cultivating genuine joy and expanding the ventures that actually fulfill me. I set the framed rendering back onto the cedar table, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the wood. Ethan walks over from the kitchen, handing me a fresh cup of tea. He leans against the edge of the sofa, his posture relaxed and inviting. He begins recounting a mildly absurd story about a junior associate mispronouncing a Latin legal term during a morning deposition. A bright, unburdened laugh escapes my lips, the sound ringing clear and authentic in the high-ceilinged room. Ethan smiles, his eyes crinkling with shared amusement, his presence a steady reminder of the healthy equal partnership we share. We stand there in the fading evening light, laughing at something small and remarkably real. The victory was never their ruin. The victory was my freedom. The evening settles quietly over the penthouse, wrapping the Seattle skyline in a soft indigo twilight. Standing beside Ethan, I realize the chaotic noise that defined the first 3 decades of my life is permanently silenced. I did not just survive a hostile familial takeover, I rewrote the entire operational blueprint of my existence. Looking back at the wreckage of the stolen wedding and the fraud that unraveled my biological relatives, I recognize that the experience was not merely a trial to endure. It was a profound education in survival, yielding 5 vital truths that now govern my life. The first lesson is that sharing genetics does not legally or morally obligate you to absorb abuse. Society conditions us to believe that family ties require infinite patience and perpetual sacrifice. We are told to keep the peace at all costs. But I learned that when keeping the peace requires destroying your own mental foundation, the price is too steep. Walking away from a toxic bloodline is an act of self-preservation, a necessary step to protect your own future. The second lesson centers on the weaponization of silence. Manipulative individuals thrive on emotional outbursts. They want you to scream, to cry, and to justify your actions because it gives them the raw material they need to paint you as the villain. By choosing unwavering restraint, by refusing to engage in their dramatic theater, you deprive them of their oxygen. Silence is not weakness. It is a flawless, impenetrable shield that forces deceivers to confront the consequences of their own actions without a convenient scapegoat. The third truth involves the true nature of boundaries. For years, my parents convinced me that setting limits was a selfish, vindictive act. I now understand that a boundary is simply a perimeter of self-respect. It is the line where your willingness to accommodate others ends and your obligation to protect your own integrity begins. Enforcing that line does not make you cruel, it makes you unshakable. The fourth lesson is about the vital importance of a chosen family. The people who truly deserve a seat at your table are the ones who value your intellect, your strength, and your independence. They do not ask you to shrink so they can feel tall. Ethan, my mentors, and my genuine friends stood by me, not because of what they could extract from my bank accounts, but because of mutual earned respect. True loyalty is built in the trenches, not inherited by birth. Finally, the fifth and most important lesson defines true victory. Vengeance is a temporary, hollow satisfaction. If your only goal is to watch your abusers suffer, you remain perpetually tethered to their narrative. True freedom is achieved when you reach a level of success and peace where their opinions, their whereabouts, and their downfalls are simply irrelevant. The greatest retribution is building a reality so beautiful and secure that the people who tried to bury you fade into insignificant ghosts. You hold the deed to your own story. Never let anyone else forge your signature on the life you are building. If you found strength in my journey, please share your own experiences with toxic dynamics and hard-won boundaries in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to Mia Tells Stories for more narratives about surviving betrayal, outsmarting manipulators, and reclaiming your power. Remember, you do not have to set yourself on fire to keep anyone else warm. Step into the light and lock the door behind you.